Hello drunks, hello pissheads, hello alcoholics. It's the penultimate episode of the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast, and our book for this episode is Mo Yan's The Republic of Wine. This is going to be a bumper episode with two interviews, two conversations. The first drunk, the first sober, the second drunk, although just to make things complicated or fun, we recorded the drunk one first and then quite a while later recorded the sober one, and you'll hear some things that indicate the change in time, and possibly some things that indicate in a slight switch up in the hosts that we had on. I won't give you too much of a preamble, I'll just take us right into the news. The reason being, I actually already recorded an intro, but realised I did it with my low quality mic, and I just can't face doing the great big opening speech I did last time, so I'm sorry to do that to you, but that is precisely what I'm doing to you. So for the Translated Chinese Fiction news, we've got 3 items. 2 are actually the announcements of new books that are coming out soon, available for pre-order, and they both have the same translator. They're both translated by Jennifer Feely. One of them is by the recently late Hong Kong writer Xixi. I'm going to try and read the entire blurb without stumbling. I managed to read one of these 2 books' blurbs without any stumbles, and then this one by Xixi, Morning Abreast, I think I had 2 stumbles, so let's see how we go. This should be a first take, but we'll see. Here we go. In 1989, the Hong Kong cult classic writer Xixi was diagnosed with breast cancer and began writing in order to make sense of her diagnosis and treatment. Morning Abreast, published 2.5 years later, is a disarmingly honest and deeply personal account of the author's experience of a mastectomy and of her subsequent recovery. The book opens with her gently rolling up a swimsuit. A beginning swimmer, she loves going to the pool, eavesdropping on conversations in the changing room, shopping for swimsuits. As this routine pleasure is revoked, the small loss stands in for the greater one. But Xixi's morning begins to take shape as a form of activism. In a conversational, even humorous manner, she describes her previous blinkered life of the mind before she came into her body and learned its language. Addressing her reader as frankly and unashamedly as an old friend, she coaxes and confesses, confronts society's failings, and advocates for a universal literacy of the body. Morning Abreast was heralded as the first Chinese language book to cast off the stigma of writing about illness and to expose the myths associated with breast cancer. A radical and generous book about creating in the midst of mourning. So that's this book. It is coming up for pre-order, I believe, from the New York Review of Books. Now, the other book in question is by an author I hadn't heard of before, Lao Yi-Hua, another Hong Kong writer, also translated by Jennifer Feely. So this book's called Tongueless, and the hook line says it is a gripping psychological thriller steeped in the current political tensions in Hong Kong. So here we go. I did this with no stumbles last time. Let's see how we do this time. Tongueless follows 2 rival teachers at a secondary school in Hong Kong who are instructed to switch from teaching in Cantonese to Mandarin or lose their jobs. Apolitical and focusing on surviving and thriving in their professional environment, Wai and Ling each approach the challenge differently. Wai, awkward and unpopular, becomes obsessed with Mandarin learning. Ling, knowing how to please her superiors and colleagues, thinks she can tactfully dodge the Mandarin challenge by deploying her social savviness. Wai eventually crumples, so that's 2. Wai eventually crumples under the pressure and dies by suicide, leaving her colleague Ling to face seismic political and cultural change alone, as she considers how far she will go to survive such a ruthlessly competitive work environment. Sharp, darkly humorous, and politically pointed, Tongueless presciently engages with important issues facing Hong Kong today, during which so much of the city's uniqueness, especially its language, is at risk of being erased. Well, that wasn't a clean sweep on either book, but I think I improved on Morning Abreast, so there's that. Okay, the third and final news item. It's just an interview I thought I'd highlight. It's published in a couple of places, I believe. One of them is the Cha Journal. It's an interview of the academic Sabina Knight by the mostly children's literature, Helen Wang. Sabina, I've read one of her books. It's the, I forget if it's the Oxford or Cambridge University, I forget who publishes the series. They do these this series called A Very Short Introduction. So there's like a very short introduction to typography that I own. There might be, for example, a very short introduction to quantum physics. Well, Sabina Knight is the author of the very short introduction to Chinese literature, but she has other works as well, and she's an academic. So yeah, this is a thing you can read for free online. There'll be a link to it, as well as links to the publisher's page for these books in the show notes, like the description beneath this episode. Oh, I didn't say the publisher for Tongueless, by the way. It's Feminist Press. So there you go. There you go. Okay, I think that does it for an intro, really. So just to clarify again, we have a sober discussion first, and then a drunken discussion. The sober discussion features me, Dylan Levi King, and Michelle Deeter, both returning guests. And then the drunken conversation, we have Dylan again, and then joining us we have Martin Winter, a poet and translator. So yeah, enjoy. What else can I say? Enjoy and consider drinking while you're listening, especially for the drunken conversation. It might improve the flavour. Right, so welcome listeners to the penultimate interview. Well, the penultimate episode, the first of 2 interviews in the penultimate episode of this podcast for the time being. It's The Republic of Wine by Mo Yan. And here with me for part 1 of the 2 interviews you're going to hear, I've got 2 returning champions, Michelle Deeter and Dylan Levi King. In part 2, you're going to hear Dylan again. And rather than Michelle, it'll be one Michael Winter. So here we go. Stupidly, in part 2, you'll hear us doing a full run through of like the book's plot. So I think this time I'll just introduce the basic premise and we'll see where the conversation takes us. And then we'll get the more plot focused breakdown in part 2. So keep listening if you want to hear that, or skip ahead. So this book is about a cop, Mr. Ding Go-er, who is sent out to a place called Liquorland to investigate reports of corruption and possible cannibalism within the party. And his investigation goes very badly, and a lot of drinking occurs. That's the basics. I guess we can now introduce the guests. If you've been listening a long time, you know who they are. You'll hear Dylan introduce himself again anyway, but just for fun. Dylan, in brief, who are you? Why are you here?
Sure. I'm a translator of Chinese literature. I've translated Jia Pinghua. My most recent work is a forthcoming novel by Mai Jia, which will be out in 2024 through Head of Zeus. And Mo Yan has been one of my favorites forever. Like many people, he's the first Chinese novelist whose book I ever sat down and tried to work my way through.
And Michelle, likewise, who are you? Why are you here?
I'm a translator and interpreter based in Northwest England. I also teach translation from time to time. And I just found this book interesting in that it really kind of stretched my reading. I love crime fiction. I have translated 3 Chinese crime fiction books so far, but I don't always read literature with a capital L, or this kind of literature that would be prize winning. And it was a good challenge.
Yeah, I think in part 2, the interview that listeners are going to hear later, you're not going to hear us talk very much about the book as crime fiction, I don't think. So that's an interesting angle we could dig into. I think in part 2, you'll also hear me asking Dylan a bit like in depth, what's your experience of reading Mo Yan? So I'll skip that question for you, Dylan. But Michelle, what stuff by this obscure, completely unknown Nobel Prize winning author have you come across before?
I started Red Sorghum and quit maybe 5 pages in. So I don't know nearly as much about Mo Yan as either of you. But there's a lot of Chinese authors out there, in my defense. And it's, it's interesting because when he did get the prize, like I remember reading about it in the news, just kind of a little bit vaguely, but didn't really find any interest in reading the book until you asked me about it.
So what put you off about Red Sorghum, if you can remember?
I tried to start reading it in Chinese first, and it was enormous. So I didn't get very far in like 4 days of time, and I think work kind of just got in the way. So put it to the side and left it in Brussels.
Yeah, the second Moyan book I read, Sandalwood Death, that was a gift to me from a listener. I got Death from Stefan Rusinov, and I just never picked the thing up because it was colossal. It was like this
Mm.
weird extra extra large edition in an unusual size with small writing. But with this novel, I had no such fear because I read it as an ebook. So I really went in blind as to like how long it was going to be. And from what I could glean, it's longish, but not crazy long. But I honestly couldn't tell you how long this one is. And it's I've heard Moyan's got a reputation for having these really long books, but my first contact with him was the novella Radish. So like my
That's
intro
right.
to him was very short, and very readable. But yeah, Sandalwood Death was definitely a little bit of a not a slog, but long journey. I don't know if there's much more we can dig into about the length of his books. Have you got, I guess you've maybe not got any other contact with him other than just hearing the hype.
Yeah, basically that's what I'd say. Yeah.
I think we were going to maybe get more into the question of like why are so many of the big books by Chinese authors so long or sometimes so flabby? I mean, that's come up gazillions of times on the show, but for one to Dylan, I know you've probably got thoughts. Do you think there's excess fat in the book? Do you think it's longer than it needs to be?
Well, Chinese novels, as you point out, are often very, very flabby. Um, I think me and you have discussed this before. Maybe
Yeah.
it's an approach to editing novels, and it's also the sort of a sense of what the ideal novel is. The ideal novel is like the big 19th century realist epic, like Jude the Obscure or something by Victor Hugo or something like that. They're all shooting for that. In this case, I think it's not. I think it's quite. It moves quite briskly, and that length gives it room to indulge in those various um, formal experiments along the way. And I think his pacing is really excellent, and it is quite long. I read it as an ebook also, so you don't really have a sense, but I didn't feel it dragging, and I my reread of it took a couple evenings at most.
Yeah, when you were saying about how the authors are shooting for being like the classics, my brain went to the Chinese classics, which from the little I've read, as I understand it, they're often in fairly short, lots of very short chapters that are supposed to sort of hook you on to the next one. And this book, although it doesn't feel like it would be serialized in a newspaper, it is. You're gonna hear us listeners, you're gonna hear us talk more about the structure in part two, but it does constantly jump between a main plot line and then letters between a fictional version of the author and his fictional admirer, one Mr. Lee Edo, something like One Pint
Yep.
Lee. So
Hmm.
it's really broken up into little bite-sized pieces in that sense.
It probably was serialized.
Oh, right.
Most of these novels are like this would have probably appeared in somewhere like 十月, October, or Harvest, or 人民文学, or one of those literary journals before it came out. I'm almost certain, although I can't
Mm,
name the journal for sure, but it would have been really interesting in that form where you
yeah.
would have had those scenes of sort of almost like straightforward noirish crime fiction, and then suddenly this snap over to these sort of nightmarish scenes of cannibalism and crazy stream of consciousness riffing.
And it would have also been funny reading in a literary journal fictional letters to a great author,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
what's the word, flattering him.
Right.
I heard there was a controversy recently. Some cultural commentator in China said that the purpose of all the humanities is ultimately flattery industry or something. Apparently, that pissed a lot of people off, but having gone into an editing career and not being able to bag the really cool jobs, a lot of the jobs available are flattery, PR. Anyway, that's veering quite far away from the book. I'm quite content to take a sort of a freestyle structure with this interview. My next notes, comment from Michelle writing about the author or commenting on how the author has inserted himself into the book. So like we hinted at there, about half the book, or a lot of the book, are letters between Mo Yan, who appears to be a version of Mo Yan, who later actually shows up in the story, and this admirer, Alido, who's I think works as a brewer or in like a school of brewing studies or something. And then like right at the end, those two characters and they merge with the Liquorland plot line. So Michelle, I think you had a comment about like authors who you've heard of do this, who insert themselves into their own stories.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that I read Anthony Horowitz just earlier this year. So I'm clearly not well enough read. Like, I'm like, yep, I can identify one other author that I've seen do that. And you're like, ooh, interesting point. I can name five. So
Yeah,
it's been done before and it's not that surprising. Maybe what's also interesting, these look like they're all male names potentially, but there's just more male authors out there. So that's just
that
statistics.
reflects who, yeah, I think that reflects who I've read as well. And
Interesting.
a lot of them are people I read when I was younger. The most recent one is Stephen King, but even that was as an undergraduate. The other three were stuff I read as like a teenager. And one of them is two of them actually are mostly known for being like YA or young adult authors. What does Anthony Horowitz do to insert himself?
So he's written like I think it's four now and going to be five. He's written these crime fiction novels where he is an author and he has written youth fiction, young adult fiction and adult fiction, just like the real author. Um, so then he goes along with a fake detective, like researching actual crimes as they're happening so he can turn them into a book.
Interesting. I
It's
was
just like it took me forever to figure out, wait, how many of the characters in this book are real? And it seems like none of them. It's just that one of
mm,
them has a whole lot of biographical detail in it that happens to match perfectly with the real Anthony Horowitz.
right. That it's funny because I think I only learned he had written books, not for kids. I don't know, when I was an adult. Because my when I see Anthony Horowitz, I think of these rubbish, well, I thought they were right at the time, but these kind of stupid James Bond-esque books for kids called the Alex Rider series. One of them
Mhm.
was made into a really bad film. That's how I know him. You've reminded me that the like a crime or mystery self-insert author. I know a very I think this is obscure. It's definitely a weird one. Alfred Hitchcock has done this in novels he wrote. Um, I was introduced, or my class in primary school was introduced to these like an American spin on like the Famous Five and the Secret Seven. I don't know if those mean anything to either of you. Have you heard of those? They're Enid Blyton mystery stories.
Heard of the
Yeah,
author,
I
haven't.
love the Famous Five.
Oh.
I had them read to me when I was in school, and I recently picked them up as bedtime reading for kids. And there are some
Ah,
problematic parts to it, but their formula is very effective. Even though it's the same from novel to novel, there's the discovery of a tunnel and
yes.
smugglers were very big in the 1940s and 1950s children's literature, um, but and don't seem to crop up anymore. Yes, so yes, I do love.
We've done Brexit, Dylan.
Yeah,
We've got rid of them.
thank God.
Yet I was given them by my mum, who read them and loved them when they were coming out. And I think being one generation removed, and maybe partly living in Scotland, I found it a bit nauseous hearing these English kids talking about how jolly it was to go to their little den at the bottom of the garden and be brought tea and cakes by their mum. That bugged me. But we had in school we had a rare thing. A male teacher in our primary school brought in these like American Mirror World versions written by Alfred Hitchcock about like a group of, I think, three or four boys whose den is in a scrapyard, not in a cozy suburban back garden, and they get assigned missions by someone on a phone. Uh, and the person assigning them like missions is Alfred Hitchcock inserting himself, which is so weird. But sort of makes sense because he also would appear in his own films. But yeah, and I had to bring that up. Yeah, so I have a few other authors who've inserted themselves here. I'll rattle through them. Stephen King famously inserted himself into his Dark Tower trilogy, which also played into this bigger metafictional thing where in his dark, or it's not, I say trilogy, it's not a trilogy, it's a series. His Dark Tower series, he throws in lots of different characters and settings and uh, this and that from all of his works combined. So it's like a sort of nexus point. I can't imagine like a Stephen King verse. I don't imagine Mo Yan's done that. But that said, he does set a lot of his stories around Galmi County, where he's from. So there's a bit of a parallel there. Lemony Snicket is a pen name of an author. The character Lemony Snicket features inserts himself in the story. The author doesn't. I don't think that's got much bearing on Mo Yan. Although maybe the idea that the fictional Mo Yan is not necessarily the real one is kind of implied. Alistair Gray doesn't insert himself, but or he does insert the author, but the author may or may not be God. The lines are blurred. That's definitely not what Mo Yan's doing. And Marcus Zuzak, I won't spoil which of his books because it's a spoiler, but in one of his books, he does something similar where the author appears at the end and reveals he's been pulling the strings, which is like the opposite of Mo Yan in this book. He's not pulling the strings at all. He's just as useless and powerless as our detective. So that's my 5 that I was able to rattle off. I don't know if that reveals a lot about this book, but I think it is an interesting thing to explore. And I'd be interested if there are notable big name female authors that have done this, or if this is just the male ego that can't help itself. I would imagine it's all over the place, but don't know.
I just read a book called The Samurai by a French literary theorist called Julia Kristeva, and it's sort of the account
Yeah.
of her time in Paris in the 1960s, and she inserts herself as a character named Olga, and it's quite a self-aggrandizing portrait of this character, this inserted character who immediately we know to be her, but much more beautiful and much more always coming up with a witty remark at the perfect time. Yeah.
I've heard of her. I had a friend, an American friend in Shanghai, who was he was obsessed with the abject, which I think is a theory that she brought out, formulated in her academic career. So it's like bodily fluids, the color white reminds you of the horridness of the body or something. So that's where I've encountered her. But yeah, interesting that she shamelessly or proudly inserts herself in a flattering way, because I think Mo Yan basically does the opposite.
Yeah.
Although when Lee Do is complimenting him for being a great author, fictional Mo Yan is always sort of what's the word? Downplaying it, acting humble. So real Mo Yan is maybe complimenting himself by presenting himself as a humble guy who
lets other people do the talking in terms of how awesome he is. Yeah.
Yeah, so fictional Mo Yan isn't retains his literary clout that real Mo Yan has, but I wonder if that's being used to further like the theme of corruption, because when Mo Yan is brought into Liquorland, he's brought in as like a big celeb who has to be wined and dined and treated, and then like that's what he fails to deal with, especially the alcohol, but also as soon as he sees what is it, the mayor, as soon as he sees a woman, he like hilariously just collapses. Well, I think it's hilarious. So that kind of leads to the next note I've got, likable or unlikable characters, because it's maybe up to us to decide if we think the author himself in his self-insert is likable. But did any of you particularly like the detective, or did we think he was disgusting?
Not only disgusting, but just so darn annoying with his double standards. Like, oh, it's fine for me to have a mistress, but if this lady trucker, whose name I can't even try to remember, has some other love affairs, then it's going to be a terrible thing, and it's so bad, it's going to just completely ruin my life. Or I can have an affair with your wife, Diamond Jean, but you eating children, that's actually like terrible. It's like, oh, okay, so for whatever reason, you get the moral high ground, even though you're doing so many, like, I don't know how to describe them, awful things all the time. Yeah, he drove me nuts. I was so hoping he was
I
gonna die. I like wrote in my own notes, kill him off, kill him off.
Well, last we see him, he's sinking into a what would you even call it? A pit of excrement.
Cesspool?
Cesspool.
Yep.
So he's probably not getting out of that one if he's ingesting too much of it.
Yeah, it just came too late though, Angus.
No, not enough punishment.
Mhm.
I got the sense that pretty much because like right from the jump, he's hitching a lift to Liquorland, and he's immediately embarking on a very weird sexual encounter with this female truck driver. And I think we learn also in that first incident that he's got a wife or whatever back home. And I've read quite a lot of this literary Chinese stuff. I've lived in China, and I don't know. I feel like it's the as far as adultery goes there, it feels like a bit of a hangover of like the concubine mistress taking culture, where like you said, it's this hypocrisy where men, especially the more money and power you have, you take as many mistresses as you can get, and it's gendered because the reverse isn't true.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you find it um irksome, then it's going to probably be irksome for the whole book. But I did think, yeah, it was treated more lightly than all the other misdemeanors because he just felt like it was taken as a given from page one that this is what these sleazy guys are going to do, but they themselves won't consider it to be especially sleazy.
As for likable, I mean, it seems everybody there. I think you'd struggle to find anybody likable except for perhaps the lady driver, who I think never gets a name. In fact, I think
No.
that's she's really the only sort of I don't even know if she's redeemable in any sense, but she is not as terrible as everyone else. Everyone else is terrible. The corrupt cadres and the
Yeah.
Li Do seems to be a bit of a blowhard and a
Mm.
flatterer, and Moyen himself is. I mean, we've sort of covered his likability. He is kind of pompous and silly, and doesn't seem to take his literary work seriously, or his work as an investigative journalist or whatever he's doing at the end, arriving in Liquorland, and everybody else on the way is either a murderer or a criminal or a trafficker of women and children. There's
Yeah.
And there's literally a demon. There's a demon as well.
right. Right. I don't know if anybody is likable, save the lady trucker, who at least does some cool stuff, pulls some guns on people and looks kind of cool.
I was kind of cheering on the demon at a certain point where he's masquerading as a baby, and he leads a baby, or attempts to lead a baby revolution in a nursery to well, it seems like he's trying to help them all avoid being eaten by the cannibalistic elites. But in fact, what is it? He's just angry, or he's just out for himself. So he manages to save himself, but not the other babies. But yeah, in case listeners haven't realized, it's quite a strange, surreal book. This isn't Nguyen doing literary realism or even like something that's recognizably magical realism. I was looking through Goodreads reviews, and someone compared it to The Castle by Franz Kafka. I don't know if this actually came up in our part two interview. It might have, but okay, interesting. In Dylan was shaking his head there. So in The Castle, it's Kafka's last novel. It's unfinished, and it's about a land surveyor who's sent to a town, and he's got to try and get to the castle for, I don't know, a meeting with the authorities about surveying the land. And he's stuck in the town. He never actually reaches the castle. The castle stands for some unreachable thing that you're always denied access to, and he just gets caught up in various sordid incidents instead. And that's similar to this one in at least in the sense that we're in a weird town, and our guy gets to the sort of inner chambers to meet the leaders once. They get him really drunk, and from then on, he's just spiraling. He's getting nowhere.
If to some extent, I think the Kafka comparison is interesting because in this period, Moyen is writing some really weird books. There's the one either right before it or two before it is called 13 Steps, and it's about a man
Yeah.
who's locked in a in sort of a cage. So it's almost like another Kafka story. The what is it called? The Hunger Artist. Um,
Mm.
and this man in the cage is sort of the narrator who's telling all these stories of other people in various forms of human bondage for the entertainment of people who are wandering by. These are really grotesque and terrible stories, and as payment, he's fed soil for payment for telling these stories. He's described as a madman, but of course we start to wonder who is really mad and that kind of thing. So Moyen was really on something in this time in the late 1980s, and this book is kind of the crazy expression of all that madness before he kind of became a little bit more conventional.
In part two, listeners, you're going to hear us talking about being on something, because Dylan brings up how like a lot of the well, we like to think, but to what extent it's true is up for debate, that a lot of big advances in literature, arts, music, and so on, especially in the 20th century, but maybe before, come from drugs. But there's more or less an absence of that in China, and the thing that people can be on easily is booze. But I'll push that to the side. That'll be coming up later in the conversation in part two, the drunken conversation. I wanted to ask, so if there's no one we like, who do we love to hate? Because I think for me it was the demon at times. There's also a bit where he shows up in our detective story and like steals his clothes and sets fire to his room just for no reason.
Yep.
That was funny. And I like that we have like something out of, I think maybe I mentioned Lemony Snicket in part two as well, but some kind of very surreal incident where we meet the party boss and the boss of the mine, because Liquorland has a mine, and they're like the same guy, and everything they do is mirrored, and they're very ingratiating and friendly, and they're both kind of bulbous. I guess I was imagining guys with the Jiang Zemin beer belly and the trousers up to their nipples, that kind of style. I like them, although they only appeared once, I think. But Michelle, is there anyone you love to hate? I'm guessing you didn't love to hate the detective. Sounds like you just hated him.
This is interesting. That's an interesting way of kind of approaching the book. Gosh, there were parts where one pint Lee made me laugh. There were some things that he said that I could not stand, so I did not love to hate him throughout the whole book. But there were parts where it's just like, dude, is your head screwed on right, in a way that just made me laugh, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, some very contorted logic in his writings.
Oh my God, his short stories were so crap. But yeah, I think that's like looking at it through this absurdist lens, or having the background of reading someone like Kafka really kind of improves your understanding of how the book works and how the book shouldn't necessarily follow any beats. It's not going to work like that if it's absurdist. The whole land is completely illogical.
Yeah, or if you imagine it as like a hell or something, that works pretty well too. Some kind of underworld, afterlife type thing. Michelle, you had a note about our lady truck driver. So I only read this thing in English, did not really refer to the Chinese at all. And it really did strike me that this name was very clunky. Lady truck driver.
I think it's Lady Trucker, actually. I didn't fix it.
Lady Trucker, pardon me.
That's okay.
Still quite clunky.
Yeah, no, I found that to be probably the most annoying thing about the book, when you have a female character who's fairly central and doesn't get named. That sets me off, I guess.
In part two, we were lamenting that there's not like a female form of trucker, because at least that would have got rid of the word lady.
Oh, truckeress.
But truckeress doesn't sound good either.
No.
You got in the notes something like Miss Alkaline or Mickey. Is that drawn from the Chinese?
So at one point, like really early on, she says something about her childbearing abilities, and investigator Ding says that's because you don't have enough alkaline. I can fix that for you. And that's how like they left their first encounter. It was terrible. And then somewhere in the middle of the book, she's like, "You've never even asked me your name." And I'm like, "Thank you." And she just says, "From now on, you're Hunter and I'm Mickey." And then that name doesn't get used for the rest of the book. It just disappears again. So I don't know if that's referencing some other cultural work. Please fill me in if you know. But it goes away again, right? It's just like, okay, so she doesn't have a name. Lady Trucker is the closest she has to a name.
That reminds me of, there's Sanshue story in that I covered on the show in that book. I Live in the Slums, where we're in this like weird
Yeah.
hell world,
Mm-hmm.
and we're following. Is it like I forget? Is it the main character is this like rat-like creature?
Mm-hmm.
I forget if he meets another rat-like creature or if it's a little boy. But like in this weird hell world, there's a character called Ricky. So like, I
Oh.
think everyone's like the rooster or the old man or maybe a Chinese name, and then there's just hi, I'm Ricky. I'm a small child. So I don't know. I don't. It's not always clear to me what would lead an author to pick an English or not Chinese name like that, or if they've just thrown in some characters, as in Hanzi Chinese characters, and then the translator has to assign a name to it.
Yeah,
It's a mystery to me.
it is a mystery to me too. I would love to know, but it would take forever to kind of piece by piece figure out what the original was and how that was handled.
And you might not want to know. It might be like, well,
Yeah.
it's Mickey Mouse because Mickey Mouse is funny or something.
Yeah,
There might be no reason.
true.
Dylan, was there anyone you loved to hate?
Well, you said his short stories were no good, but I did quite like the letters, at least of Li Do, and his sort of disgusting flattery of Moyen is quite funny. He is sort of a wretched, terrible person, like everyone else in the novel. There is nobody like him. But I did enjoy his short stories, and I don't know. It's kind of funny that he's writing these short stories that sort of, in a sense, mimic the novel that they're contained within. I think that's an interesting aspect of it. And yeah, he comes the closest. Of course, I like as I said, I like the lady trucker. I like when she's pulling guns on people and whatnot, and she's adds a little sort of brightness to it. But that's about it.
Mm. I wonder if Moyan has had to deal with real life Li Yidos. I would guess probably at least one.
Surely, without a doubt, yeah, he must have based those on all those letters from people asking, "How do I become a writer? How do I become a writer?"
I was a bit of a Li Yido one time in my undergraduate years. One of our lecturers for the creative writing workshop I was in was off sick and got replaced by an actual published author. I think the lecturer who was ill did have like a book of poetry or something out, quite literary and highbrow, but she was replaced by a guy who'd managed to write, very genre fiction style commercial fantasy novel, self-publish it, rack up enough sales to get taken by a traditional publisher. And he said early on in the class, when I finish this module and I go away, I'll pick two of you and I'll mentor you. And I was like, wow, finally, this is how you make it big. And I was one of the two people he picked, because I actually wrote a half decent story every time we were asked to. That was all it took, really. And he said, like, if you write something, I'll look at it and give you feedback. So I had to go, because it was this guy, I had to go at writing a fantasy novel's first chapter. But I never put any magic into it. I thought it would be materialist medieval European fantasy or something where everything is rational. And he asked me like, what genre is this? And I did exactly what Li Yido did. I just made up genre titles. I just mashed words together. Li Yido is trying to invent demonic realism, and the guy's like, "What are you talking about?" And I think I sent him like this one chapter one a couple of times, chapter two another time. He gave some feedback, and then finally said, "Look, I need to focus on my relationship with my wife. So good luck." And that was that. So I have been Li Yido. I wonder if Li Yido was also 20 years old, or if he's supposed to be like 40 or something. I'm guessing he's supposed to be younger than Moyen. If he's not
Yeah,
younger,
I think he's doing a PhD at this time. But
right,
yeah,
right.
I've been Lido too in the world of translation. Like when I first started, and I mean the translator of this book, Mr. Howard Goldblatt, he was one of the people who I sent a long note to enclosing my work that I had translated and asking him for his guidance and telling him how much I admired him. It really, every translator, many who you've interviewed on this program, and many well, Howard Goldblatt is I guess your great white whale, but
Mm.
all of those people, many times, maybe 10 years ago, I sent them letters, and then things worked out better than they for me than they did for Li Do, and I would often meet these people and have to I would always bring up Nikki Harmon. Do you remember when I sent you this letter in 2006? Let's read it together and relive my embarrassment as a way to exercise that
Mm.
from my soul. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there.
And maybe that's the point of those letters, just to realize that maybe we've all been there. Or, it's so hard to get ahead in certain industries that you do feel like you have to bow and scrape to somebody. And if you're lucky, you find some way to get forward. It might not even be through that bowing and scraping, but if you're unlucky, you try your Lido luck and it doesn't even work out afterwards.
Although I feel like Lido is committing an additional sin where his career is in alcohol and he tries to like narcissistically bring that into the literature, whereas at least I wasn't trying to drag it while I was a student. But I don't know, let's say I worked in mechanical engineering
Mhm.
and I said to this guy, well, I'm going to write the first mechanical engineering fantasy novel.
Right.
Or so, I don't know. It's just that extra degree of crazy. This kind of leads us nicely to the next point in my little set of notes about schmoozing. I think because I think in part two we didn't really dig into schmoozing, because we have a portion of the novel. It's all built around one guy flattering another, but like constantly people are trying to ingratiate themselves in one way or another, often greasing the wheels with booze or trying to implicate one another with crimes. I don't know if I have any particularly deep thoughts other than that kind of in with the schmoozing is privilege. Moyen's got a privileged position as an author in the novel. The detective is maybe he's an interesting figure because
Mhm.
he's got the authority of the state behind him. So he has to be sort of massaged by people he's investigating. But he's like the one guy that I suppose doesn't try to schmooze, but it turns out the worst for him because I don't know, he doesn't have that tool of putting people at ease and plying them with food and booze. So this isn't really going anywhere. I could talk at lengths about like schmoozing I experienced firsthand working as a teacher in China, but I'll just throw this one out there.
That's actually the question I had for both of you. So I know we've all
Mm,
lived in China for some period or another, but I feel like as a woman, I didn't necessarily get schmoozed as much or wasn't required to drink alcohol to make things happen.
right.
Whereas, I was told by many different people, well, some jobs you might be able to not drink every single, for every single important meeting, but most jobs, if you're in China and you want to get something done, you have to get very drunk. So I'm curious if, what your experience was with that.
Yeah, I could talk a bit. As a teacher, I definitely saw at the teachers' meals we'd go to where they'd take the foreigners. Well, the first job I was in, there was like me, one other foreigner, who I think tended to skip the meals, then the Chinese, like the local staff. And I was asked, like the bosses or the different teachers would cheers me to see if the foreigner could take his baijiu. But I guess I was such a token foreign teacher figure. No one was really trying to get anything out of me. No one was asking me to like host their classes or anything.
They didn't need a huge favor out of you, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I could see that like the ladies were being given a pass.
Yeah.
They didn't get cheersed as much. There was always coconut milk or water or fruit juice, maybe, if they didn't want to drink the booze. But yeah, there was definitely that, not maybe schmoozing. I couldn't tell because I couldn't follow the conversation between the male teachers. And then at Shanghai High School International Division, unfortunately, there was a lot of foreign teachers. Not unfortunately, there was lots of foreign teachers, but there was a lot of foreign teachers and a lot of local teachers. And unfortunately, we were segregated quite a lot. So we were actually not participating in that like toasting culture. But I think schmoozing came in other forms. Like one time I was asked to sub. This was don't know how much it links with anything like especially dodgy in this book, but I was asked by the head of HR if I would substitute teach in a totally different school that was so Shanghai High School was a state school. We were in the international division. So the international, it's like a sort of quasi international school that was attached to a prestigious state school. Uh, And there was like a clone of the international division set up elsewhere in the city by a former principal teacher called Mr. Tang Lao Shi. And I was asked by HR if I would substitute in Star River, which was very questionable from like a contract perspective. But I was basically the I guess the deal was I would get free accommodation there. So I actually had two apartments in Shanghai with no rent for a while. And I was told I would do it for X amount of time, then go back to normal. And when it came time to go back, they asked me to extend the contract, or there wasn't a contract. They asked me just basically to stay or to transfer, and I never did. And I didn't get schmoozed at all, actually. I stayed on the line with the HR lady forever, where she didn't seem to want to take no for an answer. And I think they did try and offer me, like they said, oh well, if it's that you don't want to live in blah blah, what was it, Minhang district, we'll give you a free bus to the school every morning or something. So yeah, it's not schmoozing, but like this weird sort of favor where it was more about favors and face to prop up this dubious for-profit spin-off of a state school. Um, there's something vaguely reminiscent of like the mixture of personal interests and I don't know. It's not really very well connected, but that was like the weirdest,
Yeah.
one of the weirder experiences I had that involved like doing favors with dubious, wealthy figures. I met Professor. I met Mr. Tang on the lift one time, and I asked him how long he'd been working at the school, and he's like, "I'm the owner. Who are you?" But yeah, that was a bad example. Dylan, what's the most schmoozing you've done?
Or received.
I've done I've done a lot. I've done a lot of schmoozing over the years. With like most recently it's been on in going over for like book fairs and especially with Jiǎpinghuā, a lot of
Mm,
trips to Xi'an, and Jiǎpinghuā is a man famous for his for his carnal appetites, for sex and for alcohol and for cigarettes, but not for meat. That's the quite interesting thing about him. He's a quite a strict vegetarian.
Wow.
But the interesting thing is on those kind of schmoozing junkets where you're invited out to banquet, the sort of base level of alcohol consumption is so ridiculous on the surface. Like the style of drinking to even keep up at a basic level involves getting absolutely smashed, because these are people in the publishing industry. They're often writers. Writers are the hardest drinkers, no matter what country you are, and the Chinese are especially in these authors, because they're always being schmoozed. They're always being invited out by such and such a person who runs a real estate company who wants to get a thing of calligraphy from him. So he invites him out to a
right.
big dinner and gets him smashed, and then sends over a couple bottles of Mao Tai as a gift. So like Jiǎpinghuā is almost like on a constant circuit. Like every night of the week, he's being invited and being feted by various local business people, and is just drinking nonstop, just powering through bottles every night, bottles of this very strong, like 65% alcohol stuff.
Oof.
And it is very strange to do business in the haze of those sort of banquets. There are a lot of promises made that are never kept. There's a lot of big talk. I was taken out by a woman who heads a state-run publisher. She took me out for a dinner with one of her authors, a man in his 50s, and she was perhaps so impressed by my matching him drink for drink that both she and the author promised me the moon there. They said, we're going to ensure that any book that's published in any language will come from your English edition, your English translation, and things beyond that, promises of money money and fame and limousines, and after that night, I never heard another word from them. It was all lost in the haze.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I do have maybe similar recollections of things like that. Maybe the reason I don't remember them is nothing came of them. I think as well as a when you're like the foreign English teacher, especially in small town China, the thing to be like sold and brandished is yourself. So I don't know. Perhaps the teachers were using me to get the credit for their school rather than trying to like sign me up for their crazy deals. But
Right.
yeah,
They didn't want their star to be falling down drunk at the banquet table, perhaps.
yeah. Although it didn't stop me.
It's interesting you say the gender thing is so crucial, because on many of these junkets, or a couple of them, I was with Nikki
Yeah.
Harmon, and
Mm,
she was to basically exempt from any of this wild power drinking and passing out of cigarettes. She's an elegant woman, and knows how to handle herself very well in these situations, and the way she navigated them was simply masterful. But there is also a gendered aspect of that, and quite often, while these powerful people were out meeting, all of the young women who actually staff these publishing companies and are on the staff of these writers, are completely excluded. They're back at the hotel or wherever they're staying, and having their own little party with wine coolers or canned cocktails.
mm,
And when you ever get a chance to partake, to be invited to those gatherings, they're much more fun, because there's no pressure. There's none of that masculine. There's no shots of testosterone alongside the shots of baijiu. They're much
mm.
more relaxed and pleasant.
Yeah, I had nice low pressure evenings in KTV rooms where, yeah, there isn't even an obligation to sing well. Maybe that's a glimmer of what you're getting at. You mentioned that all the best writers, or most writers are the hardest drinkers. And I was reminded, Stephen King came up earlier, and he's got thoughts on that, being a recovered alcoholic. And alcoholism features a lot in his books, but I guess it's more personal. It's not like this abstracted metaphor for corruption like in Republic of Wine. I know I was just searching for the exact lines. I couldn't find them, but in his book on writing, he has a pop at this idea that writers are all drinkers, or the best writers are drinkers, or whatever. And I know we're going to be talking about this in the part two, where I think I said something like, I don't even agree with the dictum of write drunk, edit sober, because I can't write at all if I'm
Wow.
even a bit tipsy. But yes, Stephen King said something like the idea that like he says the idea is that as a writer, like you suffer, or you're so creative that you need alcohol to sort of get you on the level of the ordinary people, or it opens up your amazing artistic powers. And I think, and maybe I'm misremembering. I think that's more or less what he says. And he says basically it's just a myth. It's an excuse. The reality is you wanted a drink. Although possibly he concedes creative people are a little bit more vulnerable to it. But I think it's an interesting thing. Like, to what extent is it a myth that a writer or someone with artistic ambitions is gonna have some like inherent link to alcohol or other substances? Like, is it that they're more unstable? My feeling is maybe they're just a bit more lonely from because they're I think I mean it's generalizing. I think there's certainly creative people that do fit in perfectly fine with society, but maybe it's just that you're on average someone who's got pursued the creative path or has those ambitions might have more fun exploring them in their own head, inebriated, than, fitting in with everyday society. But it could equally be a sort of self-justifying myth. Again, I
And
don't really know how that connects with Republic of Wine.
Well, I mean that myth is kind of like sort of feeds into that, that's, I just parroted that myth, well, perhaps we both parroted the myth that, well,
Mm.
you don't believe in it, but I guess I do to some extent.
I'm ambivalent. I just know it for me. It's an excuse, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
Right. Yeah, it's my excuse too, but I think when you talk about Chinese writers, there's even a great connection between like drinking and masculinity, and a real
Mm.
man should be able to do that. And there is, I think that's often what writers like Jia Pinghua and Mo Yan and that generation are doing, is sort of asserting some masculinity against this sort of softer image they might have there as writers. They're, I mean, that also exists. Boozy writers in the United States. Carver or Norman
Mm.
Mailer. Those crazy drunk men whose masculinity was tied to their alcohol consumption. But I think in China it's even more powerful, and it does connect back to the novel. These sort of images of the ideal masculine
Mm.
figure in the book as well are kind of tied to masculinity, and drinking a lot is very tied to masculinity, both in real life and in the world of the novel, where these corrupt
Mm.
cadres are asserting themselves through their immense uh, consumption of alcohol.
Yeah, different authors have their own aesthetic attachments to different kinds of alcohol. So maybe for some it's liquor that burns. Maybe for some who are more their aesthetic is more earthy, or working man. It's beer or a Guinness or
Mhm.
something. And then maybe for others it's like decadent Victorians. It's oh man, absinthe or something. Maybe like a Poe. It's absinthe. There's one author, a female author I've read who it's partly about her alcoholism. It's a book I read in China. I was I was given it in a pile actually. I really didn't like her. She came across really unlikable, which
Hmm.
was made me feel terrible because it's about a book about her alcoholism and also a condition she had. I forget the name, but it's where you're blind, not because your eyes stop working, but because you can't open your eyelids. There's a name for that condition. Really strange. The book's called What to Look For in Winter: A Memoir in Blindness by Candia McWilliam. And the depictions of alcoholism in that were interesting because they're not really attached to her literary or artistic merits at all. She writes, it's an autobiography, or it's a memoir, it says in the title. It's really abject, to bring back a word, where like she doesn't really talk about what she drinks. I think it's whatever is to hand. And there's points in her alcoholism where it's so bad she's drinking, like, is it cleaning chemicals or something? It's
Oh.
something with some alcohol content, white spirit, I don't know, just absolute nightmare material. Um, and it's an interesting contrast from like stuff I might quite enjoy, like Mr. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, man. What's he called?
Hunter Thompson.
Yeah, Hunter S. Thompson, writing about getting absolutely smashed or something, or the Slickerland book where the scenes of guys being plied with Badajoe shots is it's kind of amusing and it makes a sort of aesthetic sense. Whereas a
Mhm.
depressed, privileged woman throwing all her good luck away by getting trashed every night and losing all her friends, ruining her life. I don't know. It's just interesting. One has an aesthetic and one is the bare, like, horrible thing to its logical conclusion. It's interesting. Um, right. Okay, enough of the depressing stuff. There's a note here. We're really just flying all over the place. But I know, Michelle, you wanted to flag another choice by Howard Goldblatt, why he was referring to renminbi as like literally translating it to people's currency. I'd forgotten he did that, but now you mention it, yeah. So whenever money comes up, it's called people's currency or the people's currency. Do you have any idea why you did that, Michelle, or any thought, or did you like it? Did you
I
not like
mean,
it?
I don't want to trash Howard Goldblatt too bad. I've read 3 books that he has translated, 2 of which I didn't like, but one that I liked very, very much. And so I went back to the infallible Wikipedia to see, like, was this maybe the first book he translated? No, it's more like right in the middle of his career. Right. He did do 3 that were apparently published in 2000. So I wonder if this was maybe hustled along a little bit. So what I find is that there's just a couple of spots where I would have handled it differently. And is that really enough to say this was translated badly just because I would have handled it differently? You know what I'm saying? It just grated on me sometimes. Sometimes I found something to be maybe a little bit too American sounding, or I found it to be like iron and steel are practically the same thing. And there's no reason to have prosody in like doubles in English. We do that in Chinese. We don't have to do that in English. So it's just little things like that where I was like, why? And I don't know. I would love to see what Dylan thinks. Like, do you ever get yourself a first reader, even if that's just a friend, or if they're just looking at part of a book, or is it, yep, this is my responsibility. I am a lonely translator and I give this to the publisher and they do with it what they will.
Wow. I didn't even notice he used people's currency. So I think it was probably, I can't speak for him, but I guess it was probably an artistic choice to give sort of a contribute to the mood of, you know, that this investigator sort of up against this oppressive state, and to sort of keep that weird communist language inside. I don't know. It's really weird because I don't recall anyone ever translating in his people's currency except, you know, some, you know, 1980s news article about China. It's bizarre. You know, I have some other issues with Howard Goldblatt's translations, with and even this one in particular, his sort of unwillingness to really get dirty, or his sort of like 1950s malt shop context that he comes from. You know, he's older than Mo Yan. He's kind of he sort of speaks a language that isn't really modern anymore. So it's really weird to read in like in a book published in like the last 20 years, somebody used the word derriere, or refer to a woman's breasts as mounts or something like that. Yeah, on the second thing, I you know, I'm so shy to show what I do to anyone. With when I translate something, I'll read it to myself and hope for the best, because I would be so scared to show it to anybody who I respect enough to give me an opinion. And I just send it to the editors, and I tell myself this is going to be the time that they are going to turn it back to me and tell me that I've you know, cocked it up, and they're going to have a complete redo. So yeah, that's my situation there.
It's just interesting, the different workflows, you know, like we have a lot of translators that come into the profession without really any training, without learning from a mentor necessarily, and just kind of faking it, or, you know, just working out how it should sound completely on their own. And we have some translators who might read very widely and read in translation widely. So they're like being sponges. They're learning by example, by, you know, maybe you even read and take notes of what other people are doing. And then we have people like me who are maybe more straight-laced, but, you know, master's program translation and interpreting graduate who sometimes I just get surprised. I'm like, but why would that possibly be better when it's so much longer? But that's like a Marlon James approach. You know, he's like, don't say the horse ran quickly when you can say it galloped. There's just no reason.
Yeah, it's been really weird, because I am an unlettered buffoon, sort of stumbling into the party, sort of by hook and crook, by my own maneuvering and schmoozing, making something like a career for myself. And it's very strange to come up against, you know, when you have these ideas in your head about how it should look, and you realize that there is something called translation theory, and that people have written these massive books about it, and there is actually a good discussion to be had about the purposes of many of like Howard Goldblatt's choices here, and that people's currency. And there is many dissertations and term papers to be written on just that topic. And I feel so embarrassed saying to you and to all these people listening, I have no idea. Maybe it's some communist thing or something or other. Howard Goldblatt's interesting because his path into translation is kind of interesting too. Like, he just learned Chinese for the military, and somehow sort of stumbled his way, I think, not in quite the same
into
way.
a doctorate.
Yeah, exactly.
Still though. Yeah.
And he's become the boss of all bosses of the thing until he's dead.
For real, it's true.
Yes, and will never be touched. And it's kind of interesting to just think about his workflow. And the fact is, he is sort of somebody who you can't really get a hold of, and he hasn't really written in quite a long time about his own work as a translator. So we're sort of left guessing. And with Howard Goldblatt, there's the another factor is that his wife is often working closely with him. I think in a lot of discussions of Howard Goldblatt, we sort of shortchanged Sylvia Lynn, and I think I don't think she worked on this book unless I'm wrong, but I think she's
not credited,
right? Yeah. But I guarantee she was by his side as he worked on it. That's why all male translators of Chinese fiction are married to Chinese women. Myself excluded, but all the other ones are, just for that free labor, or in her case, often credited labor. And it's sort of a thing it's impossible, in a sense, to know about, because neither has really revealed what's going on with their work. But Howard Goldblatt is a fascinating figure. In closing,
there could be a paper that's a purely statistical spouse study for translators. That would be interesting. To answer your question, Michelle, I think his choices are both about vibes. I think a strength of Howard Goldblatt is that he's got some writerly, ambitions. I don't think he writes his own fiction, but I think stuff I've read by him often reads very nicely. Like I'm reading stuff that is written rather than just translated. I think the people's currency choice is a bit odd. But if you think about like the focus on the state, the party, and also the communist legacy in the book, it makes sense. And by communist legacy, I mean it's very much like a Reform and Opening era book, in that it's about blooming corruption and private enterprise intermingling with the older party system. But a lot of the sort of Mao era imperatives are there, like the COP going in to root out corruption, and arguments to like drink more liquor because it helps build up the nation's industries, stuff like that. So I think people's currency builds on that vibe in the book. And then I think, why say iron and steel? Why, when you could just say iron or metal? Because it's iron and steel, it's like this authoritarian symbol of militaristic power. Just saying metal, I don't know, it adds an extra dimension. I think that's what it is. So the people's currency one does make me raise an eyebrow, but maybe that's because I know that's come from the name renminbi, which I know because I used to be paid in renminbi. But the iron and steel strikes me as a literary effect that maybe he's preserving, rather than like padding out word count to get paid more.
Yeah, no, I think it's just interesting. That's how translation gets interesting, is how people's brains work so differently, and they can present a text in such a different way.
Speaking of word count, I was thinking it could be good to have a look at the final chapter, the Stream of Consciousness chapter.
Oh yeah.
I stupidly did not have the ebook open ready before, so I'm just going to open it now. Republic of Wine. And it looks like I don't have my e-reader installed because I recently reset my computer. That's great. Okay.
Go on.
Well, I don't have it, so I can't read any of the final chapter. Actually, you know what? It's online. I can do some illegal.
I'm happy to read it if you want.
Yeah, is there any bit of it that jumps out of you you'd like to read a segment of?
Sure. Golden juice is nice and sticky like honey that doesn't drip. Get on the phone and have the municipal hospital send an ambulance if something happens to him. We'll be in hot water. The ambulance lights red as blood, like the eyes of a wolf are getting closer. This is a big case, an important case, an unsettled case. Lawyers and journalists will stand shoulder to shoulder. Dinko-R, you disappointing son of a bitch. A shortage of grain beat back the rightist reversal movement. Oppose bourgeois liberalization. Lots and lots of three-legged, red-backed frogs showing up in ponds, the first human sperm bank. Kurosawa's new movie, Akira Kurosawa's Dreams, peach blossoms everywhere, and on and on. That's just like
Mental.
2 pages of it.
What do you make of it?
It reminded me of Sheng Keyi. I feel like the last part of some of her books, just like the main character kind of falls apart in front of the reader. But yeah, it's almost like the musical equivalent of an outro. It's like it's not really giving you full closure. It's just kind of like, well, are you going to keep listening to the very last second? Or, well, anyways, here's a few more words. Here's a few more words. I don't know. Like, it's not as satisfying as a proper ending, in my opinion.
In part 2, you'll hear me waffling on about how I've come across a few maybe more experimental or slightly literary novels that do this, where they sort of blow things up at the end. And my feeling is it's maybe it's a cynical take, but if you're looking for a place to blow things up if you're looking for a place to be very experimental but still have a story, then the place to if you blow everything up, then you can be experimental because you are not bound by like the imperatives to use proper sentences or describe a real scenario in 3D fictional space. And the sort of logical place to blow it up is the end, because you can have a climax, but also you don't have to sustain yourself, because if the end is imminent, you can go absolutely crazy. I'm trying to think of an example. Like if you're a teacher teaching a class, your last 3 minutes can be the bit where you take it easy and play hangman,
just throw stuff
play
at him.
hangman
Oh,
or
yes.
something. And really, the English teacher brain is obviously reactivating. But yeah, I think a lot of, maybe not a lot, but it seems to be a thing I've encountered before, where when a writer has these mad ambitions, they can really, if they don't want to really go all in and write some really avant-garde stuff, then at least in the final chapter, they can have it blow up. And one way to do it is by having sort of language breakdown. There's an example, listeners will hear me citing in part 2 of a novel from Singapore called Breaking the Tongue, and the tongue literally and metaphorically breaks at the end of the book, and language breaks down. So I wondered if it was that, and maybe another thought is there's some stuff, some censored topics or politically sensitive topics that come up in that chapter that don't come up elsewhere in the book, at least not directly. And maybe throwing them into a river of other words is a way to potentially get them in more easily. Although, as I'll say this in part 2 as well, but I've read anyway that this chapter is not included in mainland copies of the book, or at least initially, that he got it published in Taiwan first with that chapter on the end, and then the mainland edition didn't have it. And as far as the consistency of the plot is concerned, it's not really affected if you chop that chapter off. The book still makes sense, so to speak. Dylan, did you have any thoughts on what he's trying to do with this final chapter?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the second part of our conversation, especially my contributions to it, when I'm becoming increasingly incoherent and belligerent and, grabbing at any idea that, flits across my mind's eye, you wonder if it's sort of an evocation of the state of that alcohol leaves you in, this sort of garbled state where your own language breaks down. I think also, this is sort of a novel of excess. It's a novel formally excessive and thematically excessive, and satirizing the excess of the era. And this is sort of throwing everything together. Just the most maximalist crazy stuff, just bringing it to this wild crescendo at the end and then slashing a knife across the canvas. At this time, there are other people doing this stream of consciousness thing. Wang Meng, who was probably still the Minister of Culture at this time, sort of made a name for himself in the 1980s using stream of consciousness to talk about the excess of the age, usually sort of like the excess of that marketization brought, and this new cultural fevers that would sweep the nation, seemingly monthly. And he sort of pioneered that and made it legitimate. And in a sense, Moyen kind of shuts it down. There's really nobody who does that anymore. I don't think. I just read this great novel. This is sort of a tangent here. A great novel called The End of August. It's a Japanese novel.
Oh, yeah.
by Yu Miri, translated by Morgan Giles. Really brilliant. Probably the best book you could read in translation of like the last decade. And it sort of plays around with a lot of that sort of stream of consciousness and these sort of polyphonic mixing without punctuation to a completely different effect than what Moyen was doing. So I was sort of reading it against that sort of restrained and beautiful, to use the word again, elegant style there, and then Moyen's crazy masculine sort of spurting himself across the pages in that final moment. Yeah.
Spurting is the right word. Side note on your side note, I saw you, Mary, and Morgan Giles at an event in Manchester, just at the Blackwells on Oxford Road, and yeah, it was nice. And I bought that book for my dad for his birthday because it's all about a runner, and that man was an insane runner, and so was my dad. So I'm pleased to hear it's also one of the best books in translation of the last decade. That's a nice bonus. I thought I would actually. Rewinding slightly before I forget, and then I will get back to the stream of consciousness chapter. Something I've meant to say about Howard Goldblatt, or a thought to ponder. I wonder if there is a Howard Goldblatt for, speaking of Japanese literature, of Japanese to English translation, because several of the older translated Japanese literature novels I've read are translated by a guy called Donald Keene, who had a background in, was it like academia or politics, but also an American, and also working at this prestigious level and attached to a lot of the big authors from Japanese lit that he sort of had, so to speak, to himself. I don't know if either of you are familiar with him, but from what I've gathered, is he dead? Yeah, he died 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But I wonder if he's a roughly equivalent figure. And I wonder if America, when it comes to East Asia anyway, has a bit of a monopoly on these guys versus other English-speaking countries these days.
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's another guy called Seidensticker for Japanese. Yeah, I think it comes out of like the I don't want to be breaking the news here, but basically area studies is sort of came out of the CIA and something, and these men come out of, to a great extent, that area studies departments or sort of that same academic departments producing knowledge about either Cold War allies or enemies. And I think well, this is just showing my ignorance perhaps, because there must be a French Howard Goldblatt, but I don't know who it is. There must be a German Howard Goldblatt. There, I just saw a man referred to as the Turkish Howard Goldblatt a couple of days ago. I completely forget his name, despite having met him several times.
Oh, he might have been on the show. He was on, well, no, there was a guy translator on. Now what was it? It was that guy I really like, Gofei. Gire Fidan, was that it?
Yeah.
A
He's a basically just like bringing all these works into translation in Turkish that were either just translated from English before or weren't in translation. Modern stuff and going back to Dream of Red Mansions and those classic works.
Mm. Well, what I've learned through the show is that for countries like that that are well, they're not smaller, but maybe the market for stuff translated from
Smaller
Chinese is
languages.
smaller
Mm.
languages. One countries with one well language countries that have man, how do I say this? Countries with their own language that is particular to that nation. So like Gure Fidan for Turkey, Turkish, Stefan Rusanov for Bulgarian, and then co-guesting on that episode, that Gilfey episode with Gure is Rauno Sainio, probably mispronouncing that, who's Finnish. And what they both told me and what Stefan's told me is like they've maybe got one rival in their home country for translating Chinese literature into the native language.
Mm.
So yeah, I guess it's easier to be the Goldblatt. What I was also going to say about the like the dominance of like the area studies and stuff is that there's almost an opposite in translated Chinese lit, at least maybe not anymore, but in the past, because the first translated Chinese lit I ever read was Lu Xun, translated by Yang Xianyi and Gladys Yang. And I know another figure who I think he did one of the first translations, if not the first, of Shui Hudran into English was Sidney Shapiro, who was American living, I think, I believe in Laos, China. I think he was there for quite a while, sort of within the party system in a way. So obviously well, not obviously, but that's not really a thing anymore. But it's just interesting that some of the big name Chinese to English translators of literature in the past were sort of inside that party system, but then your Howard Goldblatts come out from something almost opposite, the US military. But anyway, I
Yeah.
said I would take it back to the what's it, the stream of consciousness chapter, and I will. I found a particularly insane bit I'd like to read. So I'm starting halfway through a line. Here we go. I've fallen into your evil trap. He ignores my protest. A sinister smile. He fills a big glass with a pink and green emerald liquid, red maned stallion, like a sex crazed, wanton woman laughing hideously inside the glass, teasing me, horrifying me. No, no, I've had enough. Mother, help me. Pinching my ears didn't help, so he pinches my nose, pries open my clenched teeth, and forces the glass of red maned stallion down that organ of mine called a mouth like a baby with its mother's nipple in its mouth. I gurgle but can't spit it out. A burning flame licks down my corrupt throat into my stinking stomach and dissolves. I feel gutted by a knife. My eyes are closed. I want to stand up, but I can't. Oh, but can't find my legs. Where are my legs? Hanging from the ceiling, swinging back and forth like hams from Jinhua. Hanging in a butcher shop, look even more like prosthetic legs hanging from hooks in a specialty store for the disabled. Punch the conman, the evildoer Li, though, but my arms are gone too. There's nothing left. So much evil cannot go unpunished. It's just a matter of a time. The day of atonement has arrived. And I've ended halfway through a line. There was more bombastic stuff in the next couple of lines, but I had to stop. So yeah, like the idea of excess, we haven't talked much about excess, but it's a totally excessive novel, and you get an excess
Mm.
of the excess there. And I think I don't know. I'm guessing the Chinese is similar. Maybe he didn't have to work too hard, but like some of the choices of words in English are nice and bombastic as well. And yeah, just it verged into horror there for a second, severed limbs and stuff. So yeah, if it's sedate, gentlemanly literature readers are looking for, pick a different book. It's not this one. Um, did you find the book disgusting?
Yeah.
I found a lot of scatological humor, definitely.
I've almost found that par for the course for this generation of literary authors in China.
Correct.
That's a recurring theme on this podcast. But yeah, the scatological stuff is definitely here too.
And sometimes it was just like physically, how could you still be walking after you've lost all your clothes, you've lost all your stuff, and then supposedly everything that happened in the dwarfs hotel slash restaurant. How are you still walking outside? How are you even moving? But that's not necessarily gross. It's just part of that absurdist like
Mm.
logic doesn't apply here.
Were you disgusted at all, Dylan? Or were you all right?
There's I was thinking of one of the short stories that Li Do writes, which is about a dish involving the genitals of a male and female donkey put together.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
And he writes this letter back to Moyen, who's not really fond of the story or doesn't seem finds the dish very appetizing. And he says, "What's filthy about a dish that even famed critics and renowned musicians from Beijing shovel down their throats as fast as they can? What we are pursuing is beauty, nothing but beauty. It's not true beauty if we didn't create it. Creating beauty with beauty is not beauty either. Real beauty is achieved by transforming the ugly into the beautiful." And I think that maybe that's sort of kind of what he's trying to do here is sort of this poetic version of these terrible, really ugly moments, like this entire part about the consumption of infants and the braised infants, taking these completely horrific moments, that are, in sort of stark language would cause the reader to turn away and to vomit, and to turn them into something sort of beautiful in his own way. I think he's sort of turning those. He's doing what that chef in Li Do's story is doing with the genitals of a donkey with his novel.
We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. But others of us are facing down, looking through the drain grating and seeing stars glimmering in the slime down below. There's a tortured analogy for you, or metaphor, image, whatever. Tortured, whatever it is. We've been going for an hour and a half. I thought we could talk about the musical pairings. We're gonna have more of these in part 2, but I know I've got one lined up. Michelle, you've got one lined up. Dylan, is it too much? Was it too much to demand a second musical pairing? Shall we just have yours in part 2?
Are you sure I gave one in the first time? Did I give one?
I think you did. Yeah. Yes, it was timely. It was prophetic. It was the Pogues.
Oh yeah. I was going to give the
Weird.
same one today because I'd completely forgotten about that, and I'd completely forgotten. So yes,
That was
please,
the liquor.
please skip me. Yeah. What a great song though, and Shane MacGowan is another guy who is proof. He kind of, I don't know if he disproved or proved that you need to have a little liquor to get the creative juices flowing. He sort of tortured himself along the way. What a terrible existence he led while producing amazingly beautiful poetry and music.
So, listeners, you won't know unless I tell you. Part 2, which we recorded first, because of course we did, that we recorded before Shane MacGowan passed away, the Pogues frontman.
Oh.
He's since passed away, and now we're recording after he died. And Dylan recommended that Pogue song on that part 2. So, yeah.
Really good song. It's called At the Sickbed of Cuchulainn from Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash. A song about, well, you'll hear about it, but if you don't get that far, a song about drinking to excess and seeing other worlds and seeing mythical figures in your alcohol haze.
If this wasn't a sober conversation, I'd be pouring one out, or at least pouring it down my throat. But, yeah, so the song I've picked to pair, called Wanderlust, or Wanderlust, I suppose, by Every Time I Die, a metalcore band whose peak was probably in the noughties.
Because your heart is no place for a wretch like me. Another stranger passing, a common dissonance. If life is pointless, then point taken sing. So light another candle, point my body out to sea. Because your sun is no place for a wretch like me. When I unearth these passages, will I appear to be proud? Not if you're listening close enough. Not if you're sounding it out.
It's one of my absolute favorite songs, to be honest, and I'll just read part of the lyrics. I'll read a couple bits. Morals are simply a matter of time, and where you lay your head is a question of pride. But when it's said and done, you'll find it in the lines that privilege and wit made me misfortune's child. So morals are simply a matter of time. Where you lay your head's a question of pride. I think that relates to Republic of Wine because corruption is like an active process in the book. No one comes out clean. No one goes in particularly clean either. And the thing about privilege, I bring it up because I think we have a privileged cop, but I think also Moyan's maybe reflecting on his privilege as an author in that it gets him respect, which he then, or it gets him face and respect, which he then cashes in by getting really pissed at in the banquets thrown by government officials. And the sense of shame is like palpable in this song because it ends with these 3 lines. When they unearth these passages, will I appear to be proud? Not if you're listening close enough, not if you're sounding it out. Because the whole song is like this celebration of like debauchery. You get the impression he's hinting about when being on tour, maybe sleeping around or something. And it sounds like everything is a big aesthetic celebration of rock and roll, drugs, probably booze, or booze, probably drugs. But like at the end, he's saying like, look, if you look closely, I'm not proud. I'm literally calling myself a wretch and a dead man. And interestingly, Every Time I Die, they fell apart like a year or 2 ago, and it was after the front man became sober. After he sobered up, I think he became a bit of an asshole and fell out with the rest of the band. So the story goes. So probably he was, I don't know, he'd figured out how to be an asshole and get away with it while drunk and wretched, but then flipped it round and it fell apart. But yeah, I also wanted to name drop another one of their songs because this will connect with something that you'll hear me bringing up in part 2. The song's called Partying is Such Sweet Sorrow, and it starts off like this. At the bottom of the first drink, I found my nerve. At the bottom of the next one, I met my girl. At the bottom of the third drink, I found a fourth. And at the bottom of that one was a Trojan horse. And I won't, like, I get into this more in the next episode, but in the next part of the conversation. But like, I think a thing that's interesting about drinking is that it's a repetitive process, but each repetition is not the same. You're not the same after the first drink or the second, or maybe it blurs a bit. Probably 9 drinks in, you're similar to what you are 11 drinks in. But like, it's maybe not so much in the book, but I find that an interesting thing about drinking. And that thing about repetition not being really repetition is not my own idea. It's one I learned from a different podcast, quoting something else. That's more just a hook I'm dangling for listeners to keep listening. So yeah, that's my pairing. Michelle, I believe you've got one as well.
It's totally from left field. Yeah. So Suck 'Em Up is a song that is done in kind of Hawaiian type rock. And it's been done by Don Ho and also Buddy Fo. I really like the Buddy Fo version. It's live and he's like calling the audience out like,
come on, you people back there. Let me see your glasses. Lift them up, everybody. What are you drinking? Water, whatever you're drinking. Okay? Now, I've heard an expression here used while I was drinking called skull, which means like drink up, right? In the islands in Hawaii, we say suck 'em up. Suck 'em up. Yeah? And we got a song called Suck 'em Up. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up. It goes like this. Everybody sing, suck 'em up. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up, suck 'em up. Everybody sing, suck 'em up. Come on, you guys. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up, suck 'em up. Again. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up, suck 'em up. Everybody sing, Suck 'em up. Yeah. Suck 'em up. Suck 'em up. That's a new one. How you do that? What does that mean? You're empty? Waitress. This guy's empty over here. That's a new one. When you're empty, just me your glass.
oh, you need to drink more. You know, this is how this hotel makes money, which is just like Liquorland. Like, this is how we support our economy. You need to drink more. But then the lyrics come into these parts of like, this social worker has been drunk for 30 days. This person doesn't go to school, doesn't read or write because she's hanging out with the Beach Boys. And so even though it's like, yeah, drinking is great because it's what keeps our economy going. It's like, yeah, drinking is in so many different ways destroying different lives. And yet the song is so happy. Like when I listen to it, it kind of puts me in a good mood, even though the lyrics are like really sad. So it's just that nice mishmash of being playful, and yet there's just this undertone of destruction or toxicity, and being like promoting it, even though you know that there's consequences that could be like really serious.
Yeah, just goes to show like the moral / economic insistence, urge, imperative to drink isn't limited to Marxist-Leninist governments. Just right now in the UK, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is being questioned about an initiative he had when he was Chancellor during the pandemic, this thing called Eat Out to Help Out, where, as we've learned now during this inquiry, against all scientific advice, he launched a scheme where you could, was it that the government would, something like the government would subsidize discounts at restaurants, and I think possibly bars as well. So it was, the idea was the lockdown is killing the service industry. We'll help it out by encouraging people to go out for a meal or a drink. And it was branded Eat Out to Help Out. So citizens of the pandemic go help out the national economy by going for a meal in a socially distanced restaurant. I took part in that because I was so excited for like a pint and maybe a burger and a plate of chips or something, but it was totally framed as like a way to support the nation. So yeah, and it was, I don't know, I didn't get infected from that, but in hindsight, knowing that that wasn't approved by the government or the cabinet's advisors, and they just went ahead with it anyway, leaves a weird taste in the throat, so to speak.
The National Tax Agency here in Japan was realizing that their revenues were down. Young people don't drink as much as the last generation, so they had a sort of a competition between advertising agencies and calls for public input on how to raise the national liquor consumption, especially among young people who don't embrace the lifestyle of hardcore booze pounding.
Interesting.
Wow.
I mean, God forbid they spend their money on a different industry, or God forbid they just save the money.
Sure.
That would be change. It's the same in the UK. I think people are drinking less. People are smoking less. It's probably because there's other diversions available. It's not that we've become more saintly or anything. I realized I meant earlier to see if I could draw in some quotes from other reviews or commentary on the book. I thought I'd just do that now before we wind down. So I looked at Goodreads. I found a very amusing 3-star review on Goodreads because I figured 5 stars, it's the sycophants, it's the leados. 1-star reviews, it's people who didn't understand the book and are mad that they take it out on the book that they didn't understand it. So this is by, I think, an older man. Here it is. My wife and I were about to watch a film the other night when I spoke loudly during the previews. It is becoming increasingly difficult to appreciate film when the screen is constantly being obscured by references. : I'm getting too old. My appreciation for Republic of Wine thus pivoted on these gross, overbearing metaphors. : a town built on alcohol and the practice of eating children. Where does one even begin? The literal and symbolic asides to the Cultural Revolution alone boggle the modern reader. Consider me boggled and then sickened. Well, almost anyway. There was reading as gagging sublimation underway. I pushed through it, though without relief. Moyan's novel reminded me of Kafka's Castle. That's probably where I got the idea. Replete with sticky tavern floors and loose women. Each chapter is punctuated by an epistolary exchanges between Moyan and a resident of Liquorville, a doctoral candidate in distilling, as well as an aspiring author. A story from the aspiring author then follows before the chief thread of the novel is resumed. I appreciated the asides and stories more than the blind drunk narrative arc. This isn't for the squeamish. And then for like the hashtag, he put sino-sized, as in like supersized, which I thought was curious. And then I read a couple papers before doing my conversation with Dylan and Martin Winter. I had a look at the abstract of another that I thought was interesting. It was comparing James Joyce and Moyan's, I think James Joyce's Ulysses and this book, and plus Frog by Moyan, looking at the theme of cannibalism, because apparently cannibalism comes up in Ulysses, and obviously cannibalism's in this book. And like the thrust of the argument was that in Irish literature, there's not an awful lot about the Great Irish Famine, and it's also suspected that some people were able to survive using survival cannibalism. So in the absence of food, eating people that have died because of the famine. And there's similar thoughts, I guess, about the Great Famine that happened, I guess, not long after the Chinese Revolution under Mao Zedong. And it's definitely notable in like translated Chinese literature that I've read that some things like the Cultural Revolution are up for discussion. But the famine, I've read one book where it pops up, Yan Lianke's Lenin's Kisses, but basically it like seems to be as deleted from public consciousness as Tiananmen, probably more deleted because it's longer ago, as far as I could tell. So I'll just like read one wee quote from this essay because I didn't read the whole thing. However, not only did the structures of power consume people, but devour as ecological cannibals. But people as ecological cannibals devour one another. Bloom, that's I think the main character of Ulysses, realizes that everybody is eating everyone else, especially thinking of all the odd things people pick up for food. Observing that people eat like animals feeding, he silently cries, "Eat or be eaten, kill, kill." Like other animals stuffing food in one hole, and out behind, we have to feed the body like stoking an engine. All life forms are intertwined. Yes, all life forms are intertwined in the food chain, one becoming food, chyle, blood, dung, earth, and again food for another. And I guess another parallel with Moyan there is scatological stuff. I guess food and poo are different steps in the same chain. Yeah. So again, no big comment there, but it did underline like maybe there are echoes of historical famine from Chinese history, and not just from the communist period, just through history. I guess there's been a lot of famines in what's a very large agricultural nation that's gone through a lot of crises at different times. So yeah, I don't know, not much to say about that. Do either of you want to comment on that, or shall we just march on to the concluding remarks?
I'll say it's interesting to read Goodreads reviews of Chinese novels, especially kind of more literary stuff. It's kind of interesting to see what is sort of what wouldn't be, at all controversial in a work by a Chinese author. Often it's scatological stuff. It's people falling into cesspools and which it comes up in basically every big modern Chinese novel, or quite frequently. There's some mention of some fecal disturbance or some fecal mishap.
There's a lot of farts. Quite a lot of farts.
That's right.
Farts, yes.
Or even like the donkey genitals in this book, and castration is something that I've translated numerous times. That always pops up on Goodreads. It's one of those things that will set off a lot of English language readers who are not used to reading really terrifying descriptions of feces and even descriptions of organs of whether human or animal, and sexual assault and very tough language like that. There was this book by Ottessa Moshfegh, published a couple of years ago, called Lapvona, which is this sort of, I don't know if Gothic is the right word. It's sort of set in the Dark Ages. She's this American writer who's most famous for writing these books about like 20-something women in the city. Her most famous book is about a woman who stays inside for a year. She also wrote some really great short stories set in China that were published by Vice. Anyways, this book is sort of a terrifying Dark Ages novel that pushes every button. She plunges her thumb into the eye socket of every reader with these terrifying descriptions of cannibalism and of sexual assault and of butchery of children and innocent women and gory executions. And the book was terribly reviewed and was widely panned, and almost every review mentioned, we hated. It was terrible what she did. There's one scene has become, if you look up the grape scene from Lapvona, has sort of become infamous because it was sort of a thumb in the eye of all these terrible things piled on top of each other, and that's what Chinese novels are often doing. If you look at somebody like Yu Hua, who loves the scatological stuff, and Mo Yan, and even Yan Liangke will indulge in that from time to time. Certainly Xia Pinghua, all these big names that are translated. They don't violate their own taboos of their own countries, like mentioning particular famines or various political matters, but there are taboos that they wander into quite freely that are taboos for us. It sometimes makes it very difficult to translate these things, because when you're translating it that you're sort of breaking the rule, and if you were writing this in English, you would sort of edit it a little more carefully, but it's all in there.
You lose readers with every line.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
right. These terrible, just did the book I just did, terrible description of an infant born without a rectum, and I can just picture like everybody reading the English language version and just closing the book at that point and saying, okay, I've had enough culture for the day. Let's see what else is out there.
Absolutely.
I was going to say your phrase there, horrifying descriptions of feces. I would prefer it if all the stuff I encountered in translated Chinese lit was horrifying, because then it would have an effect. Like that description of the cesspool and the guy slowly sinking into it and can't. It's fantastic, absolutely terrifying, and a fitting thematic end to the book. It's the more sort of like, I don't know, a character feels
gratuitous,
or just like to what comes across to me is like gratuitous or just silly. Like a character feels nervous, or a character sees someone he really admires and is in awe of and can't help but slip out a fart, and it's like it's a weighty literary novel. It's like either this is a cultural difference or this is just a aesthetic choice that I think sucks. Those I have no time. I've got fed up with them. I don't think I would ever get used to them. But like at least the use of the cesspit, like I thought that really worked.
There's in a book called Brothers by Yu Hua. The book opens with a feces mishap played for laughs. A man has climbed into the cesspool underneath a public washroom to peer up at the genitals of of women who come in to use it, and he drowns, and there's flies buzzing around, and he's choking on liquid feces and urine, and it's all played for laughs. And it's kind of interesting what's played for laughs and what's not.
On that lovely note, do we have any final sober thoughts before we give way for the drunken conversation to follow?
Well, I just want to say that reading this book by myself was good in parts and boring in other parts, or just downright frustrating. And it's so good to have other people to talk to about the book, because I see it in a different way and get to see how it relates to the rest of the literary world. So thank you both.
I think I give my actual verdict on the book in part 2. So listeners, if you want to see if I agree with Michelle, just keep going. And I'll spare all my further thoughts because they're coming. Dylan, any final thoughts?
It'll be really interesting. This episode perhaps will serve as a warning, just like this novel itself, about the dangers of drinking, because you're hearing me now and Angus very, very sober and you know what? Did you see that? Just now I recalled several books and several authors' names, and you're about to hear me sort of rambling and trying to remember things that I can't remember in the fog, stumbling forward. And you don't need to be you don't need to drink to be a genius. You'll see that both Angus and myself, well, Angus
As I
is always
say,
very articulate. So, but let it serve as a warning. Yeah.
well, I'll say conversely, listeners, you heard me like fail to recall names of like people I befriended through this show, names of novels, and then drunken episode, you'll maybe hear them flowing out much more easily. So there's no easy
Okay.
answers as to whether or not you should
No.
drink. Me and Dylan are like the two statues or demons. One always lies, one always tells the truth, but maybe one of them's lying about lying. So good luck figuring any of it out. Okay, final closing remarks. Recommendations of other similar books. I see we've got two here from Michelle. Do you wanna
Sure.
pitch them?
Yeah, I think I'll just mention Rickshaw Boy and A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. Rickshaw Boy was written by Lao She and was also translated by Howard Goldblatt. So partly in penance for saying, I can't believe he made this book so long. I can't believe he chose 2 words when he could have chosen 1. I'd like to say that I really enjoyed Rickshaw Boy. And also manages to really in an engaging way talk about Chinese culture, which is what some people say that's the reason why this book is so incredible, is because you get so many different strands of Chinese culture coming across through this absurdist story. And then a Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James takes place in Jamaica. It was originally written in English. As far as I'm aware, it's not translated into Chinese, so it's not really the same kettle of fish at all. However, it is fiction that has some aspects of the real world, or kind of corruption in society, violence in society, and a lot of bloody or scatological or just really intense things happening on every other page. So I think if you liked Republic of Wine and you want more of this intensity, then that might be a good place to look. That's also an award-winning book, if I remember correctly.
I'll throw in one as well. That also has really intense stuff and has grime and grit and terrible people. It's a collection of short stories by my countryman Irving Welsh called The Acid House. And I seem to recall there's a short story where I think it opens with a guy getting like hit by lightning and transformed, like powered up in some way. And I just remember the descriptions are like a little bit like some parts of that free verse, no, what do you call it? Stream of Consciousness chapter, just incredibly metal, like intense, cranked up to 11 language, but also done so vividly. And I think I haven't talked about it much in this conversation, maybe not much in the next one. In fact, no, there's a bit in the next one where I quote a page where the detective is like it's describing how like the alcohol is affecting his brain and filling him with anger, and he feels like his head's inflating and his hairs are standing. It's like this incredibly OTT hyper real. That's not right. Just very, very cranked up in hyperbolic. Yeah. Something like that. Incredibly intense, unsubtle, literary, beautiful language. And that is there in Acid House, along with like sleazy guys in badly paid jobs. So like for grit and grime and the odd moment of fist clenching intensity, I think Irvin Welsh and Mo Yan could be compared. So that's my recommendation. That's all, I think. I'm ready to close this one up, I think. So thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, that's the end of the sober conversation. Now the drunk conversation is coming up. You can listen and see just how drunk you think we're getting. I didn't really feel a big change as we were chatting. I maybe was becoming a bit more free-flowing, but on a re-listen, I think you can hear this one affecting Dylan as we go along. By the way, if you do hear any reference to us planning an interview that included a different translator, maybe Eric Abrahamson, That's the place where plans change slightly. I forget if that's mentioned in the discussion or not, but if you hear it, that's the deal. We just had to change plans. So enjoy, and if you have the opportunity, this would be a great chance for you to grab a alcoholic beverage of your choosing. But don't feel pressured. Have tea, have water, don't drink anything at all. We're not here to force you to do anything against your will, okay? So relax. On the show, we have a returning guest for the third time, I think, the Levi King. And also here for the first time is Martin Winter. Very exciting to have you both here. We're going to be talking about, well, actually, you all know because you've already listened to part 1. This is another round, the second round of our conversation about Mo Yan's Republic of Wine. And this time we're in the spirit of the novel. We're going to be drinking as we speak. I have here with me, I don't know if I'll be keeping the video, but I'll hold it up to the camera anyway. The podcaster and the translator's favorite drink, the proper job, something we all crave. I'm going to crack it right in front of the microphone. There it goes. Martin, what have you got there?
Red currant cider.
That's, my girlfriend likes fruity ciders quite a lot. I think last time you were on the show, Dylan, you were drinking whiskey.
Yeah, that's quite often. But today I've switched it up. So I'm drinking some. Let me hold up the bottle, even if nobody can see it except for you two gentlemen. It's a bottle of shochu, so a Japanese spirit made from barley. This one is infused. In fact, it's infused with what you might call Sichuan peppercorns, or some kind of indigenous variety of it from Japan. So it's a little bit spicy, citrusy, and it's got that kick from that barley spirits.
Nice. I have a little something I want to surprise you both with. Before I do that, maybe we could introduce you to the listeners. Dylan, you've been here before. We can do a reintroduction, but Martin, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about who you are?
I am from Austria, from Vienna. I've studied Chinese and literature, also German literature. And I went to Taiwan in 1988 for 2 years. And in the 90s, I've been to different cities in China. And in 1999, I started to live in Beijing and stayed until 2008. And after that, I have mostly lived in Vienna.
Nice. And do you have a connection with literature, Chinese literature?
Yes, I translate Chinese literature. I have edited the German version of Past Light, which is called Leuchtspur. And yeah, I'm still doing that. And I have translated novels, stories, much poetry, and I write poems myself.
Dylan said you were a fan of, or a booster indeed, of, was it Shen Hao Bo?
Shen Hao Bo has I published a book of mine, yes, in China.
Nice.
I even have it here, yeah.
I remembered what it was I was going to say. It was when Dylan was, oh, there's your book. Great, I'm going to have to stick this on YouTube now. So many visual aids. I remember what I was going to say about when Dylan revealed his choice of beverage, soju. I was thinking maybe to avoid toilet breaks, I should have gone with a spirit and not beer, a baijiu. But the price of an arguoto here in Manchester it must be about 20 times of what you'd pay for it in China. So I couldn't face it. And I also thought it'd be a bit too dangerous. I might really blow it and drink it too fast. So I avoided that. Dylan, do you want to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a translator of Chinese literature. My most recent book that I did was the Shanxi Opera by Jia Pinghua. I've also translated Mai Jia, and a long list of contemporary authors. I'm working right now on translating a memoir by Cai Chongda, whose work I've translated before, and that should be out in sometime next year.
Nice. You may have given me some Cai Chongda to read before. What is that? Is that a male author? And am I
Yeah,
remembering that he's from Dongbei, or have I got that wrong?
you've got that wrong. He's in fact he's a very cool guy. He became an editor at GQ,
Oh, right.
and he's also an entrepreneur in the fashion business. But he writes these beautiful, absolutely beautiful memoirs about life in coastal Fujian. Lots of very touching stories about his mother and his grandmother and local customs. It does sound kind of like chicken soup for the soul kind of vibes, but it does have teeth to it also. And he's just an amazing writer. The book did very well the book came out through HarperCollins, the original book, which is called Vessel. Came out in the United States, and I think nobody read it, but the book did very well in Russia and in the Arab world, those places, which were in fact a translation of my English translation. So somebody was reading the book, but nobody read it in English translation, basically.
And you were somewhat involved in that success. So are you saying that there's another of his books that you're doing now? Is that?
Yeah, he's which is called simply Fate, and it's a book that did very well critically and commercially in China over the past 2 years. It's basically like a blockbuster book, and I'm going to translate it into English, and nobody's going to read it. But it's actually the first book is the movie rights have been optioned, and they're working on turning it into a film. So if the film has any success, it will be a kind of a boon to the first book, and perhaps it'll get a wider readership, the readership that it deserves, I think.
I'll confess that Vessel was on my list of books to maybe buy, but it's still on there. I think I'm pretty interested. Someone in GQ in Fujian. That's interesting. Okay, right. So we have to get to business. Talking about Republic of Wine, but before we really get to business, I'm going to reveal that I prepared a drinking game. I'm going to call it Republic of Wine Landmines, like a bingo game basically. But every time a bingo word is used, I'll score it off so that we don't get totally smashed. So I've written down a bunch of keywords. If I hear one of us say them, I'll say bingo or something. And at the very least, I'll take a swig of my beer, and you two are free to join in. We'll see if they all come up in the first 5 minutes. They may well. So why are we drinking? Because this is a novel all about booze. But before we get into the booze, we should just get into like the structure and the plot. I went into this book not realizing how weird the structure was going to be. I thought it would be a somewhat experimental novel, but I'd be following one character all the way through. But it's really not that. Would either of you like to go into more depth about either the structure or the plot, or if not, I can monologue.
Sure. It's essentially a story of a special investigator sent by the party, sent by the government.
That's one of the party. That's one of the big words.
Oh no! All right. Well, let me have a quick drink here.
Yeah. Okay, that's scored off now.
All right. So this guy is sent down to a sort of a rural jurisdiction, and he's going to investigate corruption. And he also hears that there's rumors of cannibalism there, so he's looking into that. That's sort of the main plot, which I'll set aside for a second. And on top of that, there is sort of a little bit of metafictional play going on where there's a writer, a PhD candidate. He's sending letters to Moyen, to a fictional Moyen or the real Moyen, and talking about his studies in alcohol. He's doing a PhD in alcohol in a place called Liquorland. and he sends his own stories to Mo Yan. These are grotesque, terrifying stories that reflect sort of what's going on, that the special investigator is going to investigate. So then we get the scenes of this special investigator being seduced, being pulled deeper into this grotesque fantasy world, this booze-soaked, excessive, debaucherous fantasy.
Debauchery
Well,
is one of the words.
oh no! All right, well, let me drink again. And then those stories are intercut with the letters between the PhD candidate who's called Li Do and Mo Yan. And then at the, I don't know if it spoils anything, but at the end, Mo Yan in fact goes to visit the place, and the place, the sort of the fantasy world that this investigator is being pulled deeper into and being seduced by, is connected to the places that Li Do is describing in his stories, and the place where he seems to live. I don't know if that gets to it. It's a very complicated plot.
Yeah,
Please.
Liquorland is jiǔliàng. In English, it's a Republic of Wine, but in Chinese, it's jiǔliàng, and that's literally Liquorland.
Republic of Wine, something like that. I was thinking of asking about that because I read the English translation, translated by Howard Goldblatt, and he named that Republic of Wine. I know enough Chinese to understand that jiǔliàng is like something like alcohol country, so Republic of Wine is obviously a creative translation of that. But then in the book, in the translation, the location is referred to as Liquorland. So I was wondering if Republic of Wine is jiǔliàng and Liquorland comes from some other similar Chinese term. But from what I'm gathering, it's all just jiǔliàng in the original Chinese.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think that
Yeah.
changes the effect slightly in the English translation.
There was actually an alternate title, which was Mingdianguo, which is like drunken country.
Right.
Was what it, I think it maybe even first appeared under that title and was changed later. But yeah, it's interesting that throughout it's Liquorland, but on the title, on the cover page, it is Republic of Wine.
It's a nice rich name.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was playing off of some other title, some other book title, Republic of, but I can't think of it. None come to mind exactly.
I'm going to type the Republic of, but I suppose if I put the Republic of something into Google, I'll just get the name of countries.
Right.
Maybe it's to make people think of the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you nailed it.
There we go. Solved it. Right. Yeah, I was going to try and talk a bit about some of the characters. So we've got our main detective, Ding Guo R. We've got, I guess, the villain, or if there is one villain, he's quite interesting in terms of the themes. A guy called Diamond Jin, who is like this indestructible, infallible, charming charmer of women and men. And he never gets drunk. He can take like an infinite amount of drink, which is probably his, in this book, that's the source of all his power. So there's him. And then we have, I guess, the femme fatale of the novel, who's, I think, only ever referred to as the lady trucker, which is a pretty, I don't know, I wonder if that sounds a bit less awkward in Chinese, but she's with us pretty much from the start to the end, adopting a number of different roles. At first, she's just a woman driving our detective into Liquorland, and then it turns out she's like the villain's wife, who she's going to betray. So she's, I guess it's some kind of weird use of a femme fatale. And about Li Do, something I would not have known with my inferior Mandarin skills is that his name means something like 1 pint Li. And the reason I got clued into that is there's an intro to the English translation by Howard Goldblatt, and it was quite canny. He said something like, there are lots of things like names with meanings that I could have translated, lots of hidden meanings that I didn't want to clutter the book with. For example, I would never tell you that Li Yido's name means 1 pint Li, and then there you go, he's told you that's what the name means if you didn't know, without sticking it into the main body of the book, which I thought was amusing. I don't know if there's any other characters I'm desperate to discuss, apart from maybe the very strange demon baby that appears in Li Yido's stories. I don't even really know where to begin with that, but one of the narratives in the stories that Li Do is sending to the fictional Mo Yan talks about this. It starts with this family who are selling their baby to like the baby farm to be sent to the kitchen to turn them into meat for the meals of the rich and powerful. But it turns out one of the babies is in fact some kind of weird demon creature who then sort of develops / blurs into being a dwarf tavern owner who becomes like another local strongman. I don't remember his name, but
You eat sure, I think.
yes, yeah, he's a player as well, so he's probably going to come up. Listeners who've not read this before might be realizing just how strange this book is. I guess we can get into the booze, the cannibalism we've heard about, and I think food, cannibalism / food are all pretty important. But like I don't know, there's a whole lot to talk about here. Does anyone want to jump in?
Well, I guess the first thing to reveal is that it does seem that there is cannibalism going on. That's the key point. That's what our special investigator comes to understand. He's pulled into the world of these corrupt party officials, and it winds up at a banquet where he sees a nude infant boy, a braised infant set up on the table, and they tell him, no, you've got the wrong idea. This is all made. The leg is made of a very fine ham, and the head is made of a cabbage, and the arms are made of lotus roots. And Diamond Jim reaches out with his chopsticks and tweaks the penis of the boy, and it comes to pieces. And finally, the special investigator goes and tastes and eats of the braised infant.
After they've sort of goaded him into drinking lots of liquor.
Yes, he is completely smashed, and he's slowly pulled into that world through the power of alcohol. Everything is sort of taking place as a sort of like a terrible alcohol hallucination that might be real and might not be real. And yeah, I don't know what my point was there, but that the key point is that there is everything that Li Do is talking about in his letters about selling children and all those things seem to be reflecting the reality that that our special investigator is encountering, the terrible things.
Yeah, and that scene where our detective is sort of being knocked off his feet with catering services, alcohol, charm, and then finally food. That and some of the other opening segments were my favorite parts of the book because the descriptions and the scenes and the characters are so cartoonish and like eye bulging and mental. I have a few. I read the book on the Kindle and I highlighted lots of bits, and I was reading through the bits I highlighted, and definitely some of the sections at the start were easily my favorite. So I thought I'd read through a few just to give a sense of how like unhinged this book is, and that'll eventually lead us to this scene where the officials are trying to implicate our guy into their world. So here Dingwater is approaching Liquorland and this Mount Luo coal mine, which is I guess his entry point into this district. Special investigator Dingwater of the Higher Procuratorate climbed aboard a liberation truck and set out for the Mount Loa coal mine to undertake a special investigation. He was thinking so hard as he rode along that his head swelled until the size 58 brown duckbill cap, which was normally quite roomy, seemed to clamp down on his skull. He was not a happy man as he took off the cap, examined the watery beads on his sweatband, and smelled the greasy door. So, like, he's thinking so hard that his head no longer fits his hat. So we're not really in normal reality right from the get-go. And he's already like sweating, surrounded by grease. Then he has an encounter with a guy who's trying to like stop him getting through a gate. And one of the most insane things I've read probably all year follows, which is this. After shaking some of the water out of his hair and mopping off his neck, he spit out a gob of saliva, blinked several times, and tried to focus on the gatekeeper's face. He saw a pair of coal-black, shady-looking, dull eyes of different sizes, plus a bulbous nose bright red like a hawthorn, and a set of obstinate teeth behind dark discoloured lips. Hot flashes wove in and out of his brain, slithering through its runnels. Flames of anger rose in him as if an internal match had been struck. White-hot embers singed his brain like cinders in an oven, like lightning bolts. His skull was transparent. Waves of courage crashed onto the beach of his chest. The gatekeeper's black hair, coarse as a dog's bristly fur, stood up straight. No doubt about it, the sight of Dingo had scared the living hell out of him. Dingo could see the man's nose hairs arching upward like swallowtails. An evil black swallow must be hiding in his head, where it has built a nest, laid its eggs, and raised its hatchlings. Taking aim at the swallow, he pulled the trigger. The trigger. Pow, pow, pow. And you find out later he was firing blanks, but it sounds, for a second, like this guy who apparently has lightning bolts running through his brain just shot a man to death because he looked a little funny. It's just completely nuts. And I forgot if I already mentioned that, as well as things already not being normal, I think as soon as we meet the detective in his truck, he's already drinking. So just like a film noir detective, he's already not okay, or not on balance from the word go. Okay, fast forwarding a bit, here's the bit where he meets these two guys who proceed to get him drunk. One is the boss of the mine, if I remember right, so he's a businessman, and one is a party boss, but they look exactly like twins. It's like something out of a absurdist novel, or it actually had me thinking of kids or teenage books I read when I was a kid, the series of Unfortunate Events books, which have this sort of surreal hell world sort of vibe in different institutions, like businesses, schools, government. I don't know, there's this weirdo world inside institutions. Anyway, so this is where he meets these two guys, and I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but these bits are so good, I just had to share them. Dingo R opened the door and walked in. It had been quite a journey filled with a range of experiences, but finally he was in the presence of the party secretary and the mine director. The two dignitaries were about 50 and had round, puffy faces like wheels of baked bread. Their skin was ruddy, about the colour of thousand-year eggs, and each had a bit of a general's paunch. They wore grey tunics with razor-sharp seams. Their smiles were kindly, magnanimous, like most men of high rank, and they could have been twins. Grasping Dingo R's hand, they shook it with gusto. They were practiced handshakers, not too loose, not too tight, not too soft, not too hard. Dingo R felt a warm current surge through his body with each handshake, as if his hands had closed around nice pulpy yams straight from the oven. His briefcase fell to the floor. A gunshot tore from within. Pow! The briefcase was smoking. A brick in the wall crumbled. Dingo R's shock manifested in hemorrhoidal spasms. He actually saw the bullet shatter a glass mosaic painting on the wall. The theme was Natha raises havoc at sea. The artist had fashioned the heavenly Natha as a plump, tender little baby boy, and the investigator's accidental firing had mangled Natha's little pecker. A crack shot if I ever saw one. The bird that sticks its head out gets shot. Dingo R was mortified. Scooping up his briefcase, he took out the pistol and flipped on the safety. I could have sworn the safety was on, he said. Even a thoroughbred stumbles sometimes. Guns go off all the time. So much I could say there. Suffice to say, everything's still turned up to 11. I listened as prep for this episode to my episode on Moyan's Sandalwood Death, Tanxiang Xing, with Stefan Rusanov. And we were saying in that one how everything is, on the blurb, someone's described the book as having lacerating prose. Everything is really in your face, sensual, vividly described, intense. And I felt like I liked this bit of the book because all this imagery about yams and bread, hemorrhoidal spasms, it's all like very twitchy and intense. The situation is absurd, and you can tell it's a Howard Goldblatt translation because every time a little willy is described, it's a little pecker. I was going to say, Dylan, when you were talking about the chopsticks, tweaking it, it's a little pecker. I noticed that because when my girlfriend was reading Wolf Totem, she noticed the Wolf Cub's willy is a little pecker. So if you like your Goldblatt as well as your Moyan, there's something for you here.
Yeah, he uses his just to a bit of a tangent, but Goldblatt tends to shy away from the too dirty words. There's a lot of derrieres and lumps throughout, but he does dig in when it's appropriate. There's a great letter from the PhD student to Moyen about a dish that he's describing, which involves a donkey's penis, a donkey's vagina impaled with a donkey's penis, and through there he uses very very tough language where he drops the dick and the pussy. So this is Howard Goldblatt. When it's appropriate, he dials it back, but when it's absolutely necessary, he'll dig in.
I kind of wondered if the little pecker comes from an original Chinese word, jiji or jiba, which I know one of them is the G for chicken, if I understand rightly. So I wonder if that's right. Where that comes from. Pecker,
I guess so.
chicken.
I guess so.
If so, what a clever man. So we've established that there's cannibalism. I think the presence of food, be it human food or not, is maybe worth getting to as well. There's a real like gourmand sort of thing going on, and I've been watching the Hannibal Netflix show recently, which is, when it starts out, is like a food porn show as much as it is a psychological thriller. But yeah, do either of you have any thoughts on booze in Chinese literature, booze in Chinese history or society, or indeed just booze in literature in general, never mind China specifically? Martin, you've not spoke for a while. Do you have any thoughts about just the theme and the uses of alcohol?
Oh, alcohol is very important in China, in Chinese literature, in poetry, Chinese poetry, but also poetry in, actually Persian poetry, Arab poetry. The word alcohol, right, comes from Arabic, and it's basically in every culture I can think of, every region I can think of. Alcohol is actually very important, whether it is officially available or promoted or not. In China, there is this culture or custom of drinking heavily. Not everywhere all the time, but among cadres and so on. So yes.
Yeah, the way it takes place, I guess famously, is at meals, and often it's meals between people in the workplace or business or politics, and it's quite, you see it in this book, it's quite gendered. It's usually men making other men drink a lot.
Yes.
But how do you think it ties into the literature? Because I'm sure in fact I know there are some lines in the exchanges between fictional Moyan and the Dou saying like all great literature had to have alcohol involved in some way, although fictional Moyan denies it and says, yeah, I only said that because I was drunk, disregard it. So a nice logical circle. Dylan, I know you have thoughts on this, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I said with very few exceptions, often women writers, pretty much every author I've met, every Chinese author I've met has been a heavy drinker. I mean, there's part of that is coming up in a cultural bureaucracy where you're required to drink, of course, but there is a connection. As Martin says, there's all the great poets were drinking. Levi was he wasn't turning down a cup of wine, and it is closely linked when you meet writers and when you hear how they work. It's quite often they write until they're too drunk to put another stroke on a character when they go out with their friends who are writers, and when they talk, when they gather to put together these ideas which are going to be turned into fiction. It's around alcohol. I to some extent I think that's how it is in Japan, that's how it is in Korea, that's how it is all over the world, and that's how it was in the West, I think, before the revolution of in psychoactive substances of the 1960s, when there was a whole new world open up. Alcohol was what gave people inspiration, and I think that's still true in China, where writers are not very likely to be hitting a hash pipe or doing a couple lines of coke before writing. It sort of fills that traditional role that it's always filled of giving inspiration.
Yeah, I forget which one of you said that the book gets pretty hallucinatory at points, which is, I think, Dylan, you said that our guy's having like alcoholic-induced hallucinations. I think when I was a kid, I grew up under the impression, yeah, if you drink too much booze, you will hallucinate. Because I saw Barney on The Simpsons, Homer's friend, seeing an elephant while drunk. But like, alcohol isn't, well, unless I've just never been drunk enough.
I think you've never been drunk enough. I think you've never for me, it was Dumbo. Seeing Dumbo
Really?
when I was a kid and seeing the pink elephants marching. But even if you talk about like the
Yes.
talk about like Baudelaire or Rimbaud, their visions are not always from hashish
There are
or
many
anything
scenes
like that.
in
Yeah, I think if you do drink enough,
Wow.
Angus, I would challenge you to drink faster and drink harder, and
I think I
you
pass
might be able to
out.
write as well as Moyen.
I have got very drunk before, but I think I pass out, or maybe I do hallucinate, but the memories don't stick. 'Cause I do lose memory a little worryingly easy if I've been very drunk.
See, you need to drink like a man drinks. A man.
Oh, I see.
I won't say anything about Moyen, but I'll speak. No, no. But drink like these men drank, which is drinking every day to excess. At which point your mind is much more open to that hallucinatory state. I've been there before.
Because all the damage has restructured everything.
Exactly. And you're falling asleep at night in this alcoholic haze, and you're seeing things, and you're waking up in the morning. You're just on the verge of the DTs, and those are the moments when inspiration really hits, and those are the reasons why the writer drinks alcohol. If they have no other access to cannabis or mescaline or any other more novel substances.
In my experiences having a go at writing, I can't focus if I'm drunk. I think I could definitely have a good artistic conversation after a few drinks, but really, what is it? Was it one of the hard-boiled writers, Raymond Chandler or something, who said, or was it one of the Beats? I don't know, who said something like "write drunk, edit sober." I would probably rather do it the other way around. I don't know, because at least editing doesn't involve a lot of typing. You can sort of whimsically just tweak a word here.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
something there.
phone-brained or keyboard-brained, whereas these guys are typewriters and pens and paper.
But this is a question to Martin and to Angus. Do you think Moyen drinks? Do you think he enjoys his drink, or should this be considered a book that he's writing sort of after he's sobering up from a banquet and thinking, I hate this drink, I hate this life, or is he an enthusiastic drinker?
Where you get near the end, he's expressing quite a lot of self-hate, or his fictional version is, where he's like embarrassed himself at a meal, and it's not just that he's becoming inebriated too quickly, it's that it's affecting his behavior and bringing out a side of himself he doesn't like, where like the female governor walks in and he's so excited to see like a commanding nice woman that he like slips down in his chair so that his head's level with the table or something, and he's clearly distressed. And it could all just be fiction, but I wonder if Moyen's had some experiences where he did enjoy the alcohol and is worried that he enjoys it so easily and so much. Or maybe I'm just projecting.
Because I've actually heard that he doesn't drink a lot.
I don't know.
But that's
I mean, maybe
Much-
young Moyan drunk a lot
yeah,
and he's cut it out.
much of the fantastic descriptions and fantastic narrative and so on is also in other Moyen novels. And this one is special because it just veers off into drunken writing. But whether you need to be drunk to do that, I would really doubt. Yeah, I would doubt that. The fascinating thing is that it gets, the whole book gets drunk, but the writer doesn't necessarily need to be drunk to do that, to write.
My feeling about those sections I quoted that I really like, that are insanely intense, is that they've got all this sort of feeling of like recklessness that a drunk person would have, but like he's cranked them so much, or at least in the English translations, they're so cranked. Every little nook and cranny is filled with something that intensifies it, and the word choice and the flow of ideas is so finely tuned. I would assume he at least edited that very sober and clear-minded, because you can't toss something like that off. That's been very finely tuned to have a maximal effect. Can
I read something from the book?
Yeah.
All right. This is my favorite. When I read this passage, I thought, I've always sort of, Jia Pinghua and Mo Yan have had a certain rivalry, and I've always considered myself in the Jia Pinghua camp and sort of written off, if a writer wins the Nobel Prize, you can be sure that their writing is not worth taking seriously. But there are certain passages here, and I'd like to read one for you that just took my breath away. This is a little bit later in the novel. The lady chauffeur, the lady truck driver, has pulled a gun on our narrator. He shuddered a bit, his eyes fixed on the blue steel of the muzzle and the black hole at the end. He was used to pointing guns at other people's heads, always the cat watching the mouse squirm under its sharp claws. Most of those mice facing death trembled with fear and pissed their pants. Only a few could feign calmness, though a shaking fingertip or a twitching at the corner of the mouth usually exposed their fear. Now the cat had become the mouse, the judge had become the judged. He studied his own pistol as if it were the first time he'd seen it. The luster, like a blue glazed tile, was as enchanting as the bouquet of a vintage liquor. Its smooth outlines displayed a kind of evil beauty. At this moment, it was God, it was fate, it was the Grim Reaper. Her large, pale hand squeezed the carved handle. Her long, slender index finger rested against the trigger, just a twitch away from driving the firing pin into the cartridge. Experience told him that a pistol in this state is no longer a piece of cold iron, but a living object with thoughts, feelings, culture, morality. There is an enriched soul within it. It is the soul of the gun holder. Without realizing it, this reverie relaxed him until he was no longer focused on the muzzle from which the bullet would emerge. It was just part of the gun. He took a leisurely drag on his cigarette. That's it.
It's delicious.
Yes. And it kind of shows what he was. You can start to see in what's coming in the novel, where he starts. It's a little bit hard to read because he starts dropping punctuation in that section, and it's sort of showing where the novel is going, where he's going to get into this long sort of a soliloquy. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, Mo Yan at this time, these novels are not so beloved as his other novels. The historical novels about where that led him to be considered the Faulkner of China. But these novels like 13 Steps, Garlic Ballads, where he's in the late 1980s, just losing his mind, trying to write like nobody else is writing. These moments are captured in this book, and it's an absolutely incredible novel. Yeah, I don't think he was drunk at all when he was writing this stuff. He was on something else entirely.
I was going to say the bit about the gun having some sentience was like a much, much, much better version of that. There's a bit in a Schwemo story I did on the show where he describes the bullets that come out of a gun as being alive and like little drops of sperm excitedly flying through the air. And I was like, what are you doing, you freaking idiot? But with this, the evil beauty of a sentient blue and black steel, it's great. I thought that there's a few bits in this book where he gets like into sinister, even like gothic imagery, but makes it enticing. It's not what I go to Chinese literature for, but he's done it, or he did it. The fact that in the back and forth between Li Do and the fictional Mo Yan, Li Do's like, look, I've invented a new style. It's called demonic realism, and you don't know whether to think, shut up, Li Do, or to think, oh, that's so cool. And like even reading secondary discussion of the book, a few critics, I think the consensus was Li Do's stories are supposed to be deliberately bad writing. But there's bits in them, like the demonic baby creature, where I'm like, that is like so fucked up and like, I don't know if I'm misusing a word, cranked. Like it's just so weird and twisted in a good way, but also infused with like what seems to be bad writing. Like I don't know. I didn't know what to make of those bits nearly as well as I did the more straightforward fiction. Martin, please go on.
No. Cranked, you mean exaggerate?
Right? Yeah, like
cranked
exaggerated and twisted at the same time. Disturbing, distorted.
Okay.
Were you going to say something?
No. I completely agree. Yes.
Right.
And it is my favorite, along with other early of my favorite novel, or my favorite piece of writing by Mo Yan.
Right.
Because of that experimental. In the later novels, when people talk about them, there's too much history involved. Yeah, there's so much history, like reality, away from the novels involved. And in this jiǔliàng, you cannot leave the novel behind, or the writing behind, and we are off into history or reality and so on. It's just too crazy. You have to stick to it, and that's what I love about it. It is absolutely realistic. It's very much you can very much imagine this is how it goes on, or and I mean not exactly, but yeah. So you cannot. I don't know if this makes sense, but you cannot with this novel. I think you cannot just discuss history or discuss Mo Yan or discuss whatever. It's so drunk crazy, and at the same time embarrassingly realistic. That you have to stick close to that.
Yeah, I would agree. You're clearly in a particular place in China, somewhere around Shandong maybe, and you're in a particular time in modern China's history, but you're also off the map in another reality. I would agree. I was going to say, so I read 3 things by Mo Yan, and they've all had their own episode on this show now. The first one was Radish, Toming de Honglo Bo, which I really enjoyed because it was getting into how a child perceives the world. So lots of sensory images. And I found that personally that was interesting to me long before I read the story. So I loved how it seemed to be about how you perceive the world and how the language dealt with that. And then the second one was one of these historical novels, like I said, Sandalwood Death, Tan Xiang Xing, which did sort of feel like a conventional historical novel, but also had some avant-garde elements. And at the end, it starts to like break down into like song, and it gets stranger and strange, well, a bit more strange and heightened. And then in this one, the last chapter, at least in the translation, it breaks into like a Virginia Woolf or James Joyce style. What's it called? Flowing. That's terrible. I went to university and learned these terms.
Monologue,
Monologue,
soliloquy, stream of consciousness.
stream of consciousness. That's it. I'll hand back my bachelor's degree in English literature. Yeah. So it's just, there's like no full stops. It just goes and goes. I think I have at least one quote from that, or highlight from that I can read to give the listeners a sample. Okay. Let me tell you why I'm writing this novel. I read it in a short article where someone was promoted and became rich because of his capacity for liquor, which inspired me. Page after page of drunken gibberish and nonsense, froth filling the mouth. The vomit made our puppy drink it. It died. The dog ate it. Made our puppy drunk. It died. The dog ate it. Or is there another one? Oh, this is a good one. Memories of the Great Leap Forward. How can people eat people? Why can't people eat people? Yi Ya cooked his son and offered him to Duke Huan of Qi, and Liu Bei ate the wife of a hunter, and Black Whirlwind. Li Kuei ate the leg of a highwayman. Li Gui roasted it first. Lu Shun, oh, that's one of my words. That's one of the landmines. So I'll take a drink. Opened the diary of a madman and found the words "eat people" written all over the ancient ledgers. First elder brother was eaten, second elder sister was eaten, little boys were eaten too. Exposes of the corrupt official world, a novel exposing dark secrets. So just, I'll veer away from deep thoughts and just say interesting factoid. This stream of consciousness chapter isn't in the mainland edition, or at least it wasn't at first. I believe this book got published in Taiwan first with this chapter. In mainland China, this one's gone because it references things you can't get published or couldn't at the time and still can't, like Great Leap Forward. And obviously in the English, it's restored. So I don't know, maybe just interesting to know that as well as the novel.
I remember there was this stream of consciousness in the Chinese when I read it in China.
Right.
But it was at the end of the 1990s. So actually, I don't remember which edition it was read in Chinese.
Well,
so there is this issue. Yes, there are differences in the Taiwan editions and then mainland editions. Not only Mo Yan, but many authors. Great Leap Forward and Lucien.
In one of his letters to the PhD candidate, he talks about Wang Meng. Wang Meng was I suppose was still the Minister of Culture if he had not died by that time. Wang Meng had done numerous experiments in stream of consciousness. He was sort of picking up on ideas that had been experimented with in the Republican era. There's a great book by Lewin called in English "Armed Christ," which is sort of a riff on Ulysses and the Molly Bloom soliloquy. And Wang Meng sort of picked that up in the 1980s and was attempting stream of consciousness in Chinese. And it's quite funny that he mentions Wang Meng in one of the letters to the PhD candidate. The fictional Mo Yan mentions him and saying, he's quite good. I regret my comments about him, and he does the same sort of tries the same thing of stream of consciousness in Chinese.
I know there's supposedly a reference to Wang Shuo in this book. There's a character who's referred to as being like a dangerous gangster who you mustn't get involved with because he has powerful friends. I didn't realize Wang Shuo was that deadly.
I don't think he was.
Judging by his Twitter account today, if he ever was, he's tamed somewhat. Speaking of dangerous gangsters, the next topic I had lined up was just vice, like crime in the novel. I definitely felt like there was some stuff from like American noir getting hard-boiled literature, film noir getting dragged in. So like the little bullet point terms I had for this was vice, crime, but as well as crime transgression, what lines are being transgressed, and how are things policed? How does politics come into how things are policed? Like I think it's interesting that it starts off like you might think it's going to be an anti-corruption novel because a guy working for the government is being sent by the government to investigate the government. But he just he doesn't get anywhere. He's not a very great agent of moral virtue because he just folds and falls and fails every single time. Can't even keep his gun.
And he waves his gun around.
Yeah.
His gun is all over this thing. All of the great sections we've read is him waving his gun around, ripping off shots, or having his gun pulled on him.
What could it mean?
Yeah.
Get Dr. Freud on the line. Yeah, he can't control his own gun, and he loses it. And yeah, and I think he possibly meets a guy with a better gun. He meets a hero of the revolution.
He is a lone. He's not reporting to the proper authorities all the time, right? He's not. He's too much alone, which is consistent with what you said, Angus, with the investigator.
Yeah, like the film noir
hard-boiled investigator,
an existential figure.
Yeah, he's not really involved in a real investigation, or not very much.
Yeah, I even found the book a bit frustrating because only about a third of it is our detective, and then another third is correspondence between fictional Mo Yan and Li Yido, and then another third is Li Yido's story. So really, Li Yido has a monopoly on more of the book than the detective. But it doesn't really matter because the guy gets no real work done, and he never calls for help. He really should phone for help, but he doesn't. Maybe that would just change. It would, if he phoned in help, it would become a real detective novel because he would get somewhere. But I think as far as he gets is that where he sees the braised boy. Actually, I meant to say about the braised boy. So in that scene, he shoots. He's trying to. I forget what he's trying to do, but his gun goes off. He shoots it. It hits the head, and there's a big splat. And the party boss and the mine director are like, "Oh yeah, that's watermelon. That's watermelon covering the walls." And he's like, "Is it?" And he can never make his mind up if it was a head or if it was brain matter or watermelon. And that has a connection with Sandalwood Death because the executioner in Sandalwood Death, I think this is in the first chapter, he brags that he cuts off more heads than Galmi County's annual watermelon harvest. So obviously in Mo Yan's head, there is a connection between, severed heads and watermelons. Maybe that's just a natural connection anyone would make, but don't know where I was going with that. I think the alcohol's taking hold.
It's a rather rural connection, yeah. Mo Yan comes from the countryside, and his novels are also close to the countryside. So melons are heads, yeah.
That was something that was on my mind reading the book, is we didn't feel like we were in the big city, didn't feel like we were in the countryside. The opening of the coal mine made it feel to me like we're just sort of permanently, we're either in industry or in wasteland, or at one point there's a sunflower field. It felt like a very unreal landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting how he jumps from hardcore realism, that sort of rural realism, which very much held sway at the time. You're talking about root-seeking literature, where you're trying to sort of evoke the countryside, and he does that in many places, especially at the start of the novel, where they're driving up with the lady driver, and the sunflower field, and then he makes these sudden leaps out of that territory, which I think is quite impressive. You have to remember this book was written in 1989 to 1992. He was working on this book, which was a time when realism held sway. To a great extent, it still does hold sway in China, and that makes what he's doing even more impressive, I think.
So I do want to hammer a bit more on transgression. Like, there are so many things that are being transgressed. I guess cannibalism, it's not even just cannibalism, it's little baby boys, and specifically boys curiously. I wonder if there's any significance about that. And yeah, it gets tied back. If it hadn't occurred to the reader, Mo Yan ties it back to Lu Xun. There was an interesting thing, a chapter I read. It's called, I have a tab open. I had a tab. Have I closed the tab? No, here it is. It was chapter 6 of a book called Post-Socialism and Cultural Politics by Shudong Zhang, or Zhang Shudong, I suppose. Chapter 6, Demonic Realism. Oh, bunny quote, sorry. Demonic Realism and the Socialist Market Economy. Language Game, Natural History. Natural History. Oh dear. Natural History and Social Allegory in Mo Yan's The Republic of Wine. And there's a bit from that about... My throat's really dry. Maybe I need another swig of proper job. Yeah, so this right academic Zhang Shudong pointed out that the investigator's last line before he drowns in a vat of shit and food waste is I protest, which he says is a comic, could be read as a comic repetition and pastiche of the tragic battle cry, save the children, from Lu Xun's Diary of a Madman. So I've muddied 2 points. One was about all the transgression of not just, well, all the transgression that's in the book. For example, the harvesting and murder of small baby boys, and then how that might, I don't know, is that horror tied into other things, like referencing our man Lu Xun? I guess other transgressions, there's all the, I'm going to dance around one of my landmine words, all of the uses of sexuality. There's a lot of that right from the get-go. Quite a lot of horny characters, or perverse characters. What other kinds of transgressions? Eating strange foods other than humans, bits of donkeys that Dylan mentioned. I don't know if there's if there's other kinds of transgression I'm missing, but yeah, like, it's quite a shocking book. Does anything else jump out for you two about transgressiveness?
I mean, a lot of it is sexual. Like,
there you go. There's the word. That's
yes, like our special investigator Deung having intercourse with the lady driver. In that scene before she pulls a gun on him, she's they're locked in coitus, and it's photographed by Yui Chua, and
neither of them have really grasped consent. They're often forcing themselves on each other as well. So it fails the political correctness test, I have to say.
Yes, it is. It is not a particularly politically correct book. But yeah, I mean, the entire thing about cannibalism and, the sacrifice of young boys in particular. I mean, if you're eating young girls, that's another matter entirely. But if you're eating young boys, I mean, that's sort of a bridge too far, I suppose.
They appear on the cover in a particular way. I don't really know enough about, like, Chinese art or cultural history, but it's like the shining, perfect babies with their little bib things. I don't know if that represents something in, like, Chinese imagery. I don't know if either of you would know that. It feels very deliberate, whatever's going on.
Yeah, like the baby with the, I think it's usually translated by Howard Goldblatt as stomacher. I can't remember the Chinese word for it, but like the thing that covers the stomach.
Yeah, and always very rosy cheeks.
Yeah,
big smile.
and quite fat baby boys. Those are the most desirable of children. I mean, and as well, you can go back to the time he's writing in the 1980s. Perhaps he sees in not only the excess of the period, but the fact that this period is consuming the energies, perhaps even the lives of young men. There was a little bit of a problem in the summer of 1989, but that stretches back through the 1980s. 1986 is a big year for protest. I mean, perhaps there's some connection there. Yeah.
The essay I just quoted the
Oh,
one
it
from the
was
book about. Oh, sorry, go on.
one child policy.
Yeah,
There was one child policy, and that results in too many boys, and boys are preferred because that way the family name is preserved, and the boys are eaten, so that's even more
shocking.
in this very patriarchal society. Yes, it's even more shocking. It's even more and even more of something expensive, not something not so easily obtained.
Yeah, everything's a commodity. Everything has a value because it's the post-socialist China. The essay I was quoting from,
Precious.
the guy was making he was tying the sort of the intertextual nature of the novel with Lu Xun's Diary of a Madman, saying in Diary of a Madman, the solution, you discover society is cannibalistic based on exploitation, and then for Lu Xun, the answer is, socialist revolution. But by the time Jiǔliàng has rolled around, we've done that, and we ended up eating each other during a famine. So we try out the free market, and hey presto, we are still eating each other. So what do we do about it? Nothing. We just sort of drown in our own shit and say, I protest. But it's not like the detective was on a mission before he falls into the vat. He's not an ideological crusader, and he's not waking up to the horrible reality like our guy in Diary of a Madman. So I don't know. It felt all too familiar as a Westerner that it's the turn of the 80s into the 90s. It's the end of history. We no longer know how to get rid of man eating man. We just accept it and then make ironic jokes about it instead. I wondered if it was just as simple as that. Shrug.
Shrug.
In Diary of a Madman, narrated in the way that the style, it becomes mad. Right? It's not a very coherent narrative anymore, and that's the same in Jiǔliàng. You said the narrative wakes up, yes, but it's also disturbed very much, and the narration is disturbed.
And we're told
and that's obvious, and that's what they have in common, and what's rather rare especially in mainstream literature, and Moyen is mainstream.
We're told there's a note at the start of Diary of a Madman which says, "Oh yeah, he got better later." So this it's saying like this guy, my cousin or my brother, whoever. This was his diary. He became mad for a while. He's better now. He's got a nice job. Whereas our main guy Dingo are in Republic of Wine, like I said, plummets into a vat and drowns. But the guy he's blurring into, fictional Moyan / real Moyan, we gather has gotten better. He got very drunk. He embarrassed himself at an official dinner, but now he's in recovery. So I guess the author himself goes on a changed man, even if the narrator doesn't. Have we got much else to say about transgression? Because I can take it on to the next thing.
I think that was sort of an interest of Moyen in this period. You have these 3 books, which are the Garlic Ballads, 13 Steps, and there's another one called Herbivorous Family, which cast aside for the moment, and Republic of Wine. And in the 13 Steps, you have the narrator is a man who's locked in a cage and is forced to tell these stories about terrible, grotesque events, like a man whose face is removed to furnish a new face for a party boss, that kind of thing. The Garlic Ballads is also in sort of the same vein, in that it's about a protest. It's about the protest of farmers transgressing, to use that word, against the authority of the party itself. And Republic of Wine is in some sense sort of a carnival, carnival of transgression that's taking place in that small town, where everybody is breaking the rules that have been set by, from time immemorial, against consuming children, and against sex, and against overindulgence in liquor. I think Moyen, especially in this period, like 1985 to 1989, is really interested in that theme of the grotesque and the transgressive that he drops eventually.
Yeah, the dark carnival, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had my next section was going to be all about the style, the language, the translation. Is it all word games? We talked quite a lot about that already. There was one thing I was going to say that I didn't get to when we're talking about how the story ends, how it sort of breaks down. I've read, it's probably a thing a lot of experimental novels do, where the story reaches a crisis, and that becomes a good opportunity to throw in your experimental uses of language because the thing's breaking down. There was a book I read whilst living in Shanghai, not a translated one, but by a Chinese Singaporean author, which every now and then would throw in Chinese characters into the text. Very, very rarely at first, but the novel starts to break down. It's called Breaking the Tongue, and a character is being tortured, and as they're being tortured and their tongue gets cut by the Japanese invaders, the language breaks down as well into Chinese, which I couldn't read it apart from like every 5th or 10th character or something. So yeah, I nothing to say there. I missed that point, and I thought I'd throw it in. But do you think any of the use of language or the style is all just showiness or games, or is it all serving a purpose? Because like again, when I was re-listening to me and Stefan talking about Sandalwood Death, there was a point where like there's a name of a kind of opera, Maoqiang. Moyan changed whatever the Mao character was to the Mao that means cat, and he had characters meowing, and Stefan said, it seems like he's just having fun here. Whether that's the case or not, I guess only the author knows. But do you think the novel is like just being playful? What do you think's going on with the decision to make it so experimental?
It has to break down. It has to become drunk. That's the point of the whole novel.
Right, it's like a drunk person. They steadily get worse.
The book has to break down, basically. The novel, the narration.
First walking, then running, then stumbling, crawling, puking, and then trying to make it back to bed.
Yes. Yeah.
Why didn't I think of it that way? That's crazy. Satire came up a lot in secondary reading I'm doing. So there was suggestions that he was satirizing maybe Lu Xun. I'm not maybe, I don't know, smart enough to see what else is being satirized. Maybe, I don't know if Moyan was reading Raymond Chandler. Like, Dylan, you're pretty well read. Do you think he was satirizing anything else?
I think it's hard to say. I think to a great extent he was sort of reacting against everything that was going on in Chinese literature of the time, where there was this great interest in realism, and I think his greatest interest was in revolting against that realism. And he's always considered a great magical realist.
But there's another
danger word. Let's take a drink to that.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think he's sort of reacting to everything that's going on in Chinese literature and trying to do the opposite, trying to break away from the realism of Chinese literature of the time and going back to sort of modernist literature that he was reading in the 1980s, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not very well read on Kafka. There's a Kafka novel I would love to read, but I only ever listened to an audiobook in audiobook form, and perhaps appropriately, the track order was scrambled, so I couldn't really tell like I was making any progress through it. The novel was The Castle, the one he never finished, and in which the protagonist never makes any progress. He's sent to Kafka's hero in that book is sent to a castle to do some land surveying. He needs to get into the castle to speak to the landowners about starting the job, and he just can't get anywhere. And he's going back and forth, I believe, between like the few recurring settings. And again, I don't really know the book inside out, but I noticed in this one, in this weird landscape, our guy isn't really getting anywhere, and he keeps going back to the same places, like is it Donkey Avenue? And another parallel with Kafka, again, I don't know him, but I've read a guide to him, is there's a lot of self-hate. He often referred to himself or his characters as being like, disgusting worms, no self-esteem. He turns himself into a beetle in one of the stories. And yeah, we have a guy in this book who has hemorrhoids, I think soils himself. He's constantly embarrassing himself. And then when we meet Mo Yan, he also massively embarrasses himself as well by overindulging. He refers to himself as ugly quite a few times. Doesn't like looking at himself in the mirror because he sees an ugly middle-aged man. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe that just plugs into like human feelings about corruption, unless we're totally lost when we get implicated into corrupt indulgences. We probably healthy natural reaction is to feel like a piece of shit. If you're being a piece of shit, you should feel like it. I feel like that's an aspect of the book as well. Self-hate.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting scene when Mo Yan himself arrives in Liquorland, and he's not particularly upstanding. He's not particularly good. He has a lot to drink, and he doesn't really have a lot to say. He says a lot in the novel, but the Mo Yan, when he arrives in the place itself, is basically complicit in the entire enterprise.
Yeah, and he meets some party officials that feel much more like real party officials, and it's like it's a less cartoonish, less scary version of the same thing, where like a party boss comes out and he like sings beautifully and impresses everyone, and isn't too worried that Mo Yan might be writing something that makes him look bad. And Mo Yan is just like this cringe, from what I remember, is this sort of cringing, awkward figure who doesn't really know how to gel with these cool government officials. If government officials ever have been cool in China, I don't know, but the ones in the book are, relatively speaking, slick.
And the entire context is a book written in the late 1980s by Mo Yan. Mo Yan went through times of great scarcity, and the time he's writing is a period in the late 1980s. In the 1990s and the 2000s, it would become even more intense. But this time of conspicuous consumption, and this time when party officials were kind of living large, compared to the 1970s or 1960s in Shandong, when things would have been much tighter. And I think to a great extent he recoils from that, and he also recoils from his own relative wealth, his own relative excess and surplus.
What would you say that period of history is called?
Which period? The period of a
Yeah, one you were talking about. Yeah.
Which period? The period of with nothing, or the period with lots in the 19?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we could call it the golden age after
he's not taking the bait.
after another break. Right. What age do we call it?
改革开放, which in English
Oh,
is what,
改革
Dylan?
开放.
What's that in English?
Reform and opening. Yes, he's enjoying. I mean, that's what he's he's writing about. This it's if you want to talk about it as a political allegory, Wang Dewei or David Derwei Wang talks about it, these 4 decades of pent up desire, and suddenly asceticism is replaced with excess. And every single dream you could ever have, whether for women or for wine, is realized.
Or for men, if you're a woman, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be a lady driver and stumble across a dashing, well-armed special investigator of the party.
It made me wish, reading that over and over, lady trucker, that there should be a good, female form of the word trucker. Or even, I was thinking as well, maybe if you were trying to gloss it, you'd throw out the word lady, but then maybe he's being faithful to whoever Moyan wrote it. Anyway, I should have, when you hit the landmine, I should have taken a drink. I actually finished my beer. I do need the bathroom, so I'll probably take a quick break, come back, and then I'll take us to the final sections.
Okay.
I got a dog to walk before it gets dark, unfortunately.
All right.
So be back in like 2 minutes. Martin, you're looking very soulful. Are you okay? It's quite a beautiful image. Unless the camera's frozen. Oh, anyway, I'll come back in 2 minutes and see if it unfreezes.
Okay.
Have we lost Martin?
Yes, he said his Zoom has frozen.
Oh, right. It's frozen an amazing image.
Yes, he almost looks like a Renaissance painting of the artist contemplating the heavens.
Yeah, it was earlier when the lighting was getting a bit more chiaroscuro. I felt like I was in one of these new movies, like a horror movie set entirely in Zoom, and something's going to jump and get him. But I guess we should just proceed, because I can't hang around that long, unfortunately. But I can crack open my other beer.
Yes.
I'll just message in the chat saying as much.
Yes. Unfortunately, I've gotten quite drunk, so my coherency has really dropped. I'm not making a lick of sense.
I think you're all right. You're getting more effusive, but
oh, good.
It's a bit like saying, what would an equivalent be? I turned on the heating and now it's getting all hot. How did this happen?
Yes.
We'll keep going. Try to rejoin, but if you can't, it's okay. Okay, I'll just gonna leave my headphone to get this other beer. Okay, right. So we'll just keep going. I was gonna take it to the word of the day, the Chinese word of the day section. But I mean, before going on to all the miscellaneous section, is there anything we've not said you want to say? Anything you've not quoted yet? I've actually got something I want to say that I haven't used yet.
I would gladly read a section, but no, I'm good.
If you're feeling self-conscious, you can copy and paste
the
text and I'll read it.
No, I'll read.
Okay.
All right. Shall I read?
Yeah, please.
You're concerned that my famous Donkey Avenue dish, Dragon and Phoenix Lucky together, would attract flies. Please forgive my arrogance, but I think Mo Yen doth protest too much. What's filthy about a dish that even famed critics and renowned musicians from Beijing shovel down their throats as fast as they can? What we are pursuing is beauty, nothing but beauty. It's not true beauty if we didn't create it. Creating beauty with beauty is not true beauty either. Real beauty is achieved by transforming the ugly into the beautiful. This has 2 levels of significance. Let me explain. First, there's no beauty in sticking a donkey dick inside a donkey pussy and putting them on a plate, because they are dark as pitch, incredibly filthy, and they stink like hell. No one would eat them, that's for sure. But The head in each tavern soaks them in fresh water 3 times, bathes them in bloody water 3 times, and boils them 3 times in soda water. Then he strips the penis of its sinewy parts and plucks the pubic hair before frying them both in oil, simmering them in an earthen pot, and steaming them in a pressure cooker, after which he carves different patterns with his refined skills. Adds rare seasoning, decorates the dish with bright-colored cabbage hearts, and voila! The male donkey organ is transformed into a black dragon, and the female organ into a black phoenix. A dragon and a phoenix kissing and copulating, coiling around an array of reds and purples, filling the air with fragrance and looking so alive, a treat for the mind and the eye. Isn't that transforming the ugly into the beautiful? Second, donkey dick and donkey pussy are vulgar terms that assail one's propriety and cause the imagination of the weak-willed to run wild. Now we change the former into the dragon and the latter into the phoenix, for the dragon and the phoenix are solemn totems of the Chinese race, lofty, sacred, and beautiful symbols. And that's it.
You could do a whole podcast episode on that. There was a bit actually in that chapter from the academic book that I thought is somewhat relevant to that. Let me just find it. Oh, have I lost it somehow? Oh, I know, here it is. So it says, the reasons to drink are, to be sure, as numerous as they are convincing. The rhetoric of patriotism, resist foreign liquor, drink Chinese, contribution to the state, the liquor tax being an important source of revenue for the central government, improvement of the relationships of leaders to the masses, local customs, drink in even numbers, working class solidarity in a toast, in a toast for the charcoal-faced coal miners who cannot be at the banquet, and filial piety, drink in the name of aging mothers. And I think the reason I'm quoting that is there's an awful lot of like sophistry in the book, like perverse arguments for ridiculous things, and a lot of it I think is geared towards implication. I like eating donkey genitals. I'm going to use my clever words to bring you into this devious act. I like drinking too much. I'm going to lure you in and implicate you and so on. And the other thing I was going to say is much more basic. Oh, Martin's back. Hello, Martin. We're talking, I don't know if you can hear us, Martin. We're talking again about the donkey genitals. When I talk about how I came away from living in China, really enjoying Chinese food and seeking out the legit stuff here in the UK, common response I get is, oh, it's all gross, they eat weird stuff, I don't like it. And when I reply, first thing I say is, no, a lot of it is very diverse and there's lots of stuff you'd like, even if there's lots of stuff you don't like. But yes, they do eat lots of weird animals, or at least the weird animals are part of the cuisine. And yeah, Mo Yan's even, I guess, using it for his own ends. I don't know if people do eat donkey genitals in China, but it doesn't seem like a huge stretch of the imagination.
No, I mean, I've eaten sheep genitals in China, and Jia Pinghua frequently writes about a dish called qian qian rou, which is a sliced up donkey penis, which looks like coins. Yeah.
And it's actually, I've learned being a dog owner, because I had a dog as a teenager, but I wasn't completely in charge of the house. But now I'm a dog owner. Me and my girlfriend are the top of the chain of authority. We buy all the stuff for the dog. We've learned it's very easy to buy penises for your dog in the UK. They're called pizzles. So if you ever get a pizzle for your dog, they won't tell you unless you ask, but that's a dried up willy of an animal. So, the stuff's everywhere. It's obscured a bit more in the West, perhaps. You don't know that what a pizzle is unless you go looking.
Yes, and a very popular alcohol is called sanbianjiu, which is a deer penis. I believe it's a dog penis and a cow penis are suffused in something like brandy, and it is very good for your male health, I would say.
Managed to avoid that one. Well, I think I did. Maybe I didn't avoid it, and I did drink it. There's a more wholesome thing I'll bring up before we go to the miscellaneous section. I did really want to quote this. it's from a poem about tea drinking rather than alcohol. And to be honest, it's not deeply relevant to the book, but I learned about this one listening to an episode of a show I've mentioned on this show a few times, a podcast called Weird Studies, where they did an episode whereas at some brewery where a brewer decided to launch a beer named after them, but they talked about drinking and tried to like philosophize about it. And they said that drinking is tied up with two things that are worth analyzing: ritual, how like the rituals around how we consume substances can become as pleasurable or as addictive as the substances themselves, and the cultural attachments that go with that. And also that something like, I guess, especially an addictive substance like alcohol, repetition is important. You have one, then you have another. But through repeating and through ritual, if you think about it, you will learn that, or you experience that repetition is never really repetition, because the first cup, the first drink, the first bite is never the same as the second. They have a different quality. Although maybe once you get to like 5, 6, 7, 8, that's not true anymore. But they were reading a Japanese Zen philosopher who was quoting a Tang poet. Lu Tong is the name I'm seeing here on the screen. On the screen from the Blogspot post I found that has this poem by Lu Tong, the Tang Dynasty poet, about tea drinking. So think about this as like your shots of liquor or your bottles of beer. The first cup moistens my lips and throat. The second cup breaks my loneliness. The third cup searches my barren entrails, but to find therein some 1,000 volumes of odd ideographs. The fourth cup raises a slight perspiration. All the wrongs of life pass out through my pores. At the fifth cup, I am purified. The sixth cup calls me to the realms of the immortals. The seventh cup, but I could take no more. I only feel the breath of the cool wind that rises in my sleeves. Where is Elysium? Let me ride on this sweet breeze and waft away thither. I think our main guy in Dingoar doesn't really get this lovely experience, but he does dive down the levels of hell as he gets more drunk. So yeah, I don't really have any reason for linking this to the book. I just thought it's a great meditation on the experience of going through the levels of consuming something. It's tea in this case, but I think it totally applies for getting drunk as well. So I thought I'd quote it. But I'm running out of time here, so I'll take us to the word of the day. Do either of you want to link a word of the day to jiǔliàng, to Republic of Wine?
How about 酒量?
jiǔliàng. Okay.
酒量 means capacity or ability to drink.
Right, okay.
If you're drinking well, somebody might say, 哎呦，他的酒量挺好的. His capacity, his ability to drink is quite good. 酒量.
Yeah, this is a thing we didn't bring up. Dylan sent me an article by one Astrid Muller. I think she has a double-barreled surname, Astrid Muller something, who I've spoken to before on the internet, but also has a piece, an essay on this book. And the thing she wanted to underline is that capacity for drinking alcohol is totally the basis of power. Our villain, Diamond Jin's biggest superpower is that he basically can't get drunk. And she emphasizes that this is really tied up with manliness, both in like modern, well, a lot of societies, she says, not just China, but in Chinese society, in banquets, and indeed in this book. Like, that's the big deal, is how much can you, it's great to drink, but it's not cool if you get drunk, which is obviously there's some contradictions there, but it's totally at play in this book. If you can drink, you're cool. If you get drunk, you're a loser. So no one wins really, because none of us are immune.
No, definitely not. I'm drunk now. My 酒量 is very poor.
I'm 30. I can feel it getting weaker.
Yes,
Definitely. The 20s are over. The 30s have begun. Martin, would you also want to suggest the word of the day, or are you happy with jiǔliàng? Can't hear you. Is your mic not working, maybe? I think your mic's not working, Martin. Yeah. We can see you speaking, but we don't hear you. Okay. I'm going to keep us moving. Maybe Martin can get his audio working. Okay, a piece of music to pair with jiǔliàng. Dylan, does anything spring to mind for you?
Yeah, a song by the Pogues.
Oh, nice.
Mr. Shane MacGowan was obviously drinking a lot the song is At the Sickbed of Cúlahan, which is a terrible song about drinking.
On each side of you, with bottles in their hand. You need one more drop of poison, and you'll dream of foreign lands. When you pissed yourself in Frankfurt and got sipped down in Cologne, and you heard the rattling deck trains as you lay there all alone. Frank Ryan bought you whiskey in a brothel in Madrid, and you take some fucking black shirt who was cursing all the yids.
The lyrics go, McCormick and Richard Tauber singing by the bed. There's a glass of punch below your feet and an angel at your head. There's devils on each side of you with bottles in their hands. You need one more drop of poison and you'll dream of foreign lands.
And is there a rationale besides it's about booze?
Yes. In fact, it's sort of an. There's a line in jiǔliàng, in Republic of Wine, about our hero is entering the gates of hell at a certain point late in the book, and this song At the Sickbed of Cúlahan is sort of a similar evocation of a sort of entry into hell via liquor. It sort of hits some of the same notes about seeing angels and devils and scaly boys and whatnot. So I think it matches quite nicely.
Yes, it's funny, the capacity of booze to open up heaven and hell. Although I feel like the real hell of alcoholism is nothing to do with your drunken state; it's the damage it does to your life. Like, I'm sure
Yes.
I've read people saying you'll know you're an alcoholic or if you have a problem if it's affecting your daily life. And like, I'm all right now, but when I think back to the previous decade, yeah, there was a few things that were totally avoidable, unforced errors that were just from alcohol. So listeners, if you're thinking that describes you, consider having a tea instead, maybe.
Yes.
Every now and then.
yes.
Not all the time, but every now and then.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the great message of the book. Is it's quite ironic to drink after reading the book, which is such a great reminder not to drink. It's such a terrible evocation of what alcoholism is and what drunkenness is, and it should be a reminder never to drink. As that Pogue song is, which is you should never be like Shane MacGowan and lose all your teeth to drink.
Yeah, although I guess it's probably true for a lot of great works of art literature that deal with drugs or booze. They can be great love songs to those substances, but also great warnings. Like the one that springs to mind immediately is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like, I'll bet a lot of people who use drugs think that's a really great story about drugs, but also it shows you quite clearly how those characters end up all washed up. But I guess it didn't dissuade the author himself. I should share my choice as well. I've thought of another one, which I will have used as an intro, probably to either this second segment or the episode. I'll get to that one, but the one I picked first is by a band called Dog Fashion Disco. I believe that's a polite way of saying doggy style disco. The track is Magical Band of Fools.
Little green men follow us from town to town, speaking in riddles of digital sound, hiding in the shadow of a subway train, trying to get to heaven with the worm in his brain. Where is the hurdy-gurdy man going now? Playing such apocalyptical sounds. We are the magical band of fools. You know it ain't easy. You know it ain't easy. A horrific
It's from an album that's very transgressive. There are songs about like slicing up murder victims like pieces of meat, but also lots of silly carnival-esque stuff. Magical Band of Fools is probably one of the less. It's probably one of the only PG the most PG, or one of the most PG songs on the album, besides from a cover of the song Grease from the musical Grease. That's in there as well. So it's an extremely weird, sometimes corny album that's in there. It's carnivalesque. It feels like clowns are singing it, but it occasionally gets intense. That's why I picked it. And then the other one, this was a favorite when I was an alcoholic undergraduate. The band is Every Time I Die. They've got a song called Partying Is Such Sweet Sorrow.
At the bottom of the first drink, I found my nerve. At the bottom of the next one, I met my girl. At the bottom of the third drink, I found the fourth. At the bottom of that one was a Trojan horse. The carrion demons who brought their pride. They tempted darkness where I lost my mind. The fifth drink found it, carried it home. Well, my girl was waiting, one foot out the door. Another night spent gathering dust. Smoke shots of a marble pause. Ruination leaves the lamps are lit, so I know where the good love it is. I used to be a goddamn saint. I sang my prayers and I handled state. Until the road introduced me to sin. I only shook hands with drink, but he had his friends with him. I cursed the day we raised our glass. I'm like a prince to let the devil pass. 'Cause he ain't never left this town, and only beaten and I'm born to living with him now. I used to be a holy man. One foot on the end of the
And I'll just read the first verse, because I think it links with that tea poem I read. At the bottom of the first drink, I found my nerve. At the bottom of the next one, I met my girl. At the bottom of the third drink, I found a fourth. And at the bottom of that one was a Trojan horse that carried in demons who brought their brides, and they tempted darkness when I lost my mind. Well, the fifth drink found it and carried it home, where my girl was waiting, one foot out the door. That's like the first half of Republic of Wine. It's quite a close match. So yeah, I'll go for those two. I had a section. I got about 10 minutes before I need to fuck off and walk the dog. So we were gonna take pot shots at Howard Goldblatt or worship him, one or the other. But we don't have to do that. If there's anything else you want to talk about, Dylan.
No, I mean, in a certain sense, I wish Howard Goldblatt had gone further and not talked about mounds and derriere. I mean, I haven't heard the word derriere in a work of modern fiction, published after 1950. But Howard Goldblatt is for everything bad I have to say about him, he's translated some of the best works of Chinese fiction, and he's been an indefatigable booster of Chinese fiction. So I really can't say anything about him, and any day now he's scheduled to drop dead. I mean, he's in Hawaii driving around in a BMW. So I would like to be him more than I would like to tear down his image.
Is there any common critique among translators? A gripe?
Yes.
Aside from he's getting all the work, or he got all the work.
Yes, I mean, every translator hates Howard Goldblatt. They hate him for his sort of simplistic 1950s baby boomer, or not even a baby boomer. He's the greatest generation.
Right.
Milquetoast language. But what are you gonna do? He's the best there ever was. He's his choice of novels is also questionable, in that he likes the dissident novel. That's what he's always liked since the 1970s. So a lot of what Chinese literature gets translated into English is very shaped by his interest and his perspective. So there's a lot that's interesting that hasn't been translated, but what are you going to do? he's the best. So,
That's funny. We're at episode 99 of the podcast, and I'd never thought of or been. No one has said to me, "Yeah, he's too safe in his word choices." And oh dear, I'm definitely been drinking because I forgot the second point you made that he favors dissident stuff. I'd never heard it put forward that was sort of down to the influence of one man. I wondered, my assumption, there was assumption I went in from the get-go is this is Western tastes. We privilege the people that we imagine as dissidents or rebels. Okay, and from my understanding, he's like translated so many things, some that have been big commercial successes, others that are like, there's translations of his I've like learned about from like they're 10 years old. I've only just heard of them because they're buried in some academic press. My understanding is he's very spread out. Maybe the ones that have commercially done the best are by people who are somewhat rebellious or outright rebellious.
Yeah, I mean, he's a beast, if I could put that in that he's sort of like an octopus that sucks up everything. So he's done books like Notes of a Desolate Man by Zhu Tianwen, who's a Taiwanese writer who wrote about a gay man dying of AIDS, and he tackled that book. If he had not
to call back, I can't resist. I think you boosted that book when you first came on the show. You recommended it. And I apologize. I've still not read it.
Such an incredible book, and an absolutely unspeakably creative and deep book. And if not for Howard Goldblatt, we would never have read it. But I mean, Howard Goldblatt's tastes. Howard Goldblatt is very funny. He's sort of like a typical American Greatest Generation liberal who's very interested in these books that attack the Communist Party. He's interested in he was never interested in Jia Pinghua. Jia Pinghua is of course my favorite writer. He was never interested in Jia Pinghua, who's sort of number 2 to Mo Yan in esteem in the Chinese literary elite. He was never interested in him because he wasn't dissident enough. But Howard Goldblatt is always plays it safe, in the hands of a younger translator, in the hands of a more risk-taking translator. This book, Republic of Wine, would be much filthier. There wouldn't be so much mentions of peckers and whatever other euphemisms he uses for the penis. It would have been much filthier. Like if you had given me the book jiǔliàng, it would have been an unpublishably filthy book, which to my not to my credit but to my detriment would be perhaps not in the spirit of the book. So Howard Goldblatt is this person who you must esteem, who you must credit with bringing so many great books into translation, but especially as a translator, you have to question some of his choices.
Maybe it's because his wife is like his first proofreader.
Yeah, that's like, right.
Don't be naughty.
Yeah, that's right. And she's a brilliant translator on her own. Whatever her name is, Sylvia
Lin, I think.
Sylvia Lin. Okay. Yeah. She's a brilliant translator on her own, and I think she steers Howard towards some correct choices. But you can see it's very funny that the greatest translator of Chinese literature is somebody who is in their 80s and who is not long for this world, and there's no figure that approaches him. You have people like Jeremy Tiang.
I think it's Jeremy is he gets a lot of work and it's good stuff.
And you can see the great difference. Like Jeremy Tiang is sort of the inheritor of the great translator. Or I came on here before and I said Howard Goldblatt was Jay-Z and
Nicky Harmon is Nas.
Yeah, Nicky Harmon was Nas. Nicky Harmon is also not a young woman. I don't want to be telling any tales out of school. I don't want to be.
I think she's young at
She's
heart.
young at heart. She's absolutely brilliant, but there's absolutely nobody to follow those people except for Jeremy Young, who is also not a young man. He's in his 40s, I believe.
Looks great though. Maybe it's a sign of success though that the translator's field and the range of books is getting more diffuse. It's a bit like with subcultures in the internet. I realize I said I'd go at 4. It's 3 minutes to 4 here in the UK, so I'll speak triple speed. In say the 70s or the 80s, you have subcultures that are very easy to spot, that are clear, concentrated things, and there's only so many of them. The internet comes along. There's still subversive tendencies in in Western culture, but they're diffuse, miniature. It's hard to point to any one thing surging ahead. And it seems to me like more and more Chinese lit is getting translated to English. There's an awful lot of translators. Maybe it's just that the field has broadened, so it's much less likely that any one person will become a figurehead. The whole thing just becomes more diffuse, and then we can't point to a replacement for Howard because the state of play has changed so much that there can't be one.
Yeah, that could be what is that, some Mark Fisher kind of BS?
I don't know.
I'm joking.
Mark Fisher would be more pessimistic. It would be things are getting worse. We don't have enough state subsidized patricians giving us the good popular modernist translations. That would be Mark Fisher.
My final comment.
Final ever contribution to this podcast.
Final contribution ever to this. Yes. This is the penultimate episode of the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast. In that, I think it's a gosh darn shame that it is ending, and I should be on the final episode. You should give me some space on the final episode. It's
going to be a party, so you can show up.
All right.
So but it's not the final contribution, probably.
All right, but I think what you've done is absolutely incredible. And if anybody goes out there and reads Howard Goldblatt's translation of The Republic of Wine by Mo Yan, you've done a great service that perhaps you don't even understand. I don't fully understand that you've done a great service to the people, to the masses, to popularize these works, and there's absolutely nobody doing what you do, and I fear that you don't quite understand the great contribution you've made to the culture at large and to the culture of Chinese literature and translation. So
is this where we talk shit about the Chinese literature podcast? My nemesis is.
No. God, no. I've been a guest on of their podcast too. So I mean, they're slightly too academic. I kind of, I have a great chip on my shoulder about academics. I'm like the notorious B.I.G. said, a high school dropout made more money than my teachers. I feel kind of the same way. They called the police when I was, in front of their building trying to hustle to feed my daughter. But I think you've done a great thing, and I think anyone to push people to go read these books, these difficult books, and to expand people's image of what Chinese literature and translation is. I think you've done a great thing with that, and that's also the reason why I cannot fault Howard Goldblatt, who's as somebody who's translated these books, I know that he's expended hours of effort, hours of blood, sweat, and tears.
Career, a lot of a life.
Exactly. And I don't say with any ressentiment, to use the Nietzschean word, his driving of a BMW, because I think he should be driving a BMW.
A translator who can afford one is a great thing.
Yes, I should be driving a BMW too. That's my final words. I should be driving at least a 3 Series BMW.
Yeah, well, it's not over yet. It might still happen. And I'd say I'm looking at his translation of Jia Pinghua's Ruined City. I was going to ask, that's interesting that doesn't get dirty enough, and he's not into Jia Pinghua, because that's a dirty Jia Pinghua book. But maybe that's for the next episode, because I do have to scoot.
All right. Let me get you out of here.
Yeah. And a lot of his books are up there as ebooks, which means even if they run out of print, hopefully the files,
yes,
the files will stay there for posterity. So yes, I should scoot, but thank you for coming on, Dylan. Thank you for coming on, Martin. Martin has messaged in our 3-way WeChat group saying his final piece of analysis. This is a good one. jiǔliàng is not about individual drinking, not very much choice, but whether or not you drink as an individual. So it's not a warning about individual drinking, but rather about the culture, about society. The characters don't have very much choice to drink or not in the long run. I definitely I've been on the receiving end of that. Teachers, nights out in Jiǔliàng province, where like I think as a foreigner I could have gotten away with refusing the baijiu, but yeah, it's a bit shitty if you don't want to drink and you're being pressured to. So wholesome final lesson. You can always say no, but you can also always say yes as well to the next drink. You said you'd let me go. I have to let myself go. Thanks for coming on, Dylan. And see you for the 100th episode, the party, where I think at the very least I'll have at least one drink.
All right. I hope I wasn't too incoherent.
No, I think you got more coherent as you went on.
All right.
And
have a good night.
Hopefully Howard wasn't listening.
No, Howard, I love Howard. Don't say anything like that.
I love you, Howard. I
love you, Howard. Howard, you son of a bitch. I love you.
All right, we've come to the end of the penultimate episode before I put the show on hiatus. So the next episode, episode 100, I'm planning to just be like a party, freeform one, a bit like I did for episode 50. So this is sort of like the last standard episode, at least until I resurrect the show. I assume I will at some point. I mean, I don't want to promise because you know how life is. You intend to come back to something and sometimes you never do. Like that might happen, but it is somewhat my intention to bring the show back. And there's certainly no shortage of books, short stories that are eligible for being covered. So I just want to say a really big thank you to all of you listeners. I don't really have big plugs to do because I'm going to be pausing all payments on the Patreon, probably not uploading anything up there, and I may make it all available for free. I'll decide about that later. And I guess the one bit of promo I can do is just to say, if you've only listened to a few episodes of this podcast, I strongly advise you go look through the back catalogue. A fun place to do that would be the show's homepage, trchfic.com, trchfic.com. That's got like tags and categories and lists and all sorts of things that you can use to explore the episodes. But to get back to the point, just a huge thank you to all of you, because you are the people I do this for sure. The show's been going since 2018, so it's not been 5 full years because we're just starting, or I should say it's not been 6 full years. No, hang on, I'm getting my maths wrong. I started the show in 2019 and here we are finishing up in 2023, although I think 2024, but I did start early in the year, I think in 2019, so I guess it's going to land about having run for 5 years. So yeah, I've done it. It's had a huge effect on the direction of my life, maybe as sizable as the time I spent living and working in China. And if one does the maths, I have been running the show longer than that period of actually living there. I think that's fair to say. I kind of wish I could have done more episodes in this stretch of time, but life's got in the way. I edit these things quite heavily, and I try to make them very polished. If I was to bring the show back, I might make it a more streamlined format where I could bang episodes, maybe shorter episodes out a bit faster, but it's all theoretical. So yeah, it's essentially, although this thing has benefited me a lot in many ways, brought me new friends, new kinds of enjoyment, new horizons, it really has primarily been to put something onto the internet that wasn't already there, that people would get something out of. So if that's done it for you, good. That's what I wanted. That was the mission. So yeah, tune in for the next episode if you'd like to hear a sort of party conversation about Chinese lit. If that doesn't bother you, and this is going to be basically the last one for you before I resurrect the show and of course you loyally return, then thank you very much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your drinking buddy, and 再见。